Thank you. Welcome to 3:30 p.m. Wednesday, March 11th, Town of Qualicum Beach regular council meeting. I'd like to recognize that we are in fact holding this meeting on the lands of the Coast Salish people. Adoption of the agenda. Seconded. All in favor? Oh, sorry, Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are two discrepancies that I'm hoping we can address on page 14. Comment from Ezra Morse should say District D, not District B, and which is less important than the other one I flagged, which is on page 6. Yeah, we need to substitute where it says the RDN has provided $500,000 to the RDN has been approached to provide $500,000.
And that is in case the fact for sure. Do we have those down, Heather? Very good. Adoption of the minutes as amended. Thank you. Approval of minutes. Correspondence. Anything? Seeing nothing, moving on. Committee and liaison reports. I will start. It's been a while, but I'm going to keep it as short as possible. It's we didn't get to it last meeting. Last month, I've had numerous meetings with residents and businesses regarding a myriad of topics. March 3rd, update on the bus garage, discussion on land sales and policy coming at the COW in the very near future. Meeting with MP Gord Johns, discussing regional and local issues and projects. I'll do a notice of motion at the CEO update regarding help with our local communities, specifically on the coast, that are dealing with some fisheries issues, but I'll bring that to the CEO update. That's in support mostly of Mako Noel and Ucluelet, who's starting it, but we'll also write the letter to the minister, of course, with your approval. At that meeting we had the mayors and RD chairs in Mid-Island, including Qualicum Beach, Tofino, Ucluelet, Port Alberni, Comox, Courtenay, and Cumberland, with Gord Johns, of course. A great meeting, outstanding meeting. We vowed we were going to do it twice a year. Numerous topics, including sharing of property tax, transfer tax, and liquor tax with municipalities. That's a big wish, I'm thinking. Fisheries, RCMP calculations, doctors, economic development, opioids crisis, affordable housing, just to name a few. Like I said, it was an exceptional meeting, doing a minimum of twice a year. Next one in Cumberland. Oceanside Services Committee, Bolinas Track, RDN failed to support at this time with a tied vote. Next steps regarding the Raven Song. I just threw this one in. It's called Navy Days that the Legion has every year. And what they do is they on a list underneath the boat they served on. And then you'll see them walk in and they'll say, oh my God, so-and-so is here. And they're actually meeting with people they haven't seen in years and years and years. If you've never been, it's open, so please feel free to attend, and it's a wonderful, wonderful event. RDN Hospital Board regular meeting last night, minutes are online. Cell tower discussion, bus garage, Qualicum Commons open house, and Nanaimo Regional District Hospital Board again. And another meeting last night of the Committee of the Whole of the RDN with a myriad of topics that are all online for you to look at. And that concludes my report. Thank you. Parks and Rec, Councillor Felmer.
Thank you, Mayor Weiss. I got nothing to report on from the end of Parks and Recreation, but I did want to give some clarity on something. I have received a couple emails over the last couple weeks or since our last council meeting concerned about whether or not I read my emails that I receive on council. And this came from, at the last council meeting, 2 members of council were insinuating that I do not read my emails. And now I've been receiving emails and phone calls of residents who hire me, concerned that I'm not reading my emails. So I wanted to give some clarification on why I got frustrated at the last council meeting when we were discussing the deferral of, or a reconsideration of a motion that related to the budget. My frustrations came from the discussion to do that was amongst 2 council members before the meeting, and then did not relate to the rest of us. So the 2 of us, which were the members on council, did not know that that was coming. That's where my frustrations came from. Not that I was not reading my emails. I received the emails from the group that related to. Instead, two council members decided to insinuate that I didn't read the emails, and that's what I was coming from. And now I have residents concerned that I'm not doing my work. So I just wanted to offer some clarification to everybody else on council that I am, in fact, reading my emails. And if we had better and open communication, we would not have gotten into this situation. That concludes my report.
Community Development, Councillor Scott Harris.
All right, so I've got about 3 pages of things, which obviously I won't go over all 3 pages because it's about a month and a half worth of events. One of the biggest ones was January 30th. There was the public meeting for VHA's board. So there was a pre-meeting, which was closed to the public, and there was an open meeting at the end. So I did go up to the chair of the board and some of the other board members to talk about where we have outlying data. So where Oceanside is a region, we don't have Qualicum Beach specific data, but just Oceanside is a region where we have outlying data, and this is going to tie into something else I did in February. But one of those areas is actually suicide. So there's a statistic for how people are dying called potential years of life lost. We're the second worst on Vancouver Island and the Sunshine Coast is Oceanside, which is something not many people think about, and I wouldn't have thought about either. But in 2017, we had the highest rate of what's called youth psychiatric hospitalizations. And I don't know if there's a correlation between those 2 data points, but I did mention it to the board, please look into this. I don't have enough information, but please do look into this and see if maybe there's some best practices we can implement that will ameliorate the impacts on our region as a whole. As well, also too, in the closed portion, I did talk a little bit about trying to scale up primary care in our area. We have a lot of seniors who, if they have a doctor in Courtenay or Nanaimo, they have to drive on the fastest highway in BC to access that medical care, and it will result in people not taking appointments for minor things, which turn out to be big things. As well, you're going to increase the likelihood of traffic accidents. The most likely driver to be in an accident in BC is a driver over 75, not teenagers. And the most likely to be involved in a fatal accident is someone over 85. So that was the 30th of January. And then let's see, some conversations with the chamber. Kim Burden's here from the Parksville District Chamber, and he's also helping out the Qualicum Beach Chamber as well. So I really appreciate all the support that is being offered for the Qualicum Beach Chamber. Let's see, there's the cell phone conversation, and of course the VIU students. I've had a meeting with the Perfect Storm Group. February 22nd was the coolest night of the year. So there's 125 or 152, no, 126, sorry. $26,000 almost, 126 people showed up for that. And February 24th, there was a awareness for suicide event held at St. Stephen's in town. And so someone was there for Vancouver Island Crisis Line, and one of the big things they do is they actually, there's a phone number called BC 811, so you just call 811, that'll get you in touch with healthcare services, a wide range of services. It's a really useful resource. But also Vancouver Island Crisis Line is not just people who are actively suicidal, it's a lot of their calls are actually people who are just having a hard day and are really struggling. So feel free to reach out, even if you're not in a state of crisis, because it's better to get ahead of things and not reach that state. What else? There's been a steering committee for the track at Bolinas. They have a Canada Helps webpage, which is online. So when I get a little bit more organized, I'm able to post all these notes. There'll be a big, long link, but they are starting to actively fundraise in the community. School districts, like municipalities, have charitable status. So if you donate over $25, I believe, you will get a charitable receipt for that. And also, too, there's a meeting with the Tourism Association. They're very excited about Timberfest. Some good conversations about the RDN requirement, about the hotel tax and affordable accommodation. In the rural areas around us, the Tourism Association is spending more money in fees than they're actually receiving in tax. So it was an idea, that's a good idea, but maybe the implementation is a little bit problematic. 27th, there was Wounded Warrior, so the mayor and I were at the Legion. He had to prepare for a funeral, I believe, so it was good to see everyone. It's not just veterans, it's also first responders. And there's a few folks in the community who've done a lot of work for service dogs who are there. And they're trying to create a new program, which is actually really exciting. And that is pretty much it. Oh, and March 4th, there was Young Professionals of Oceanside had their AGM, so I showed up for that too. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Arts and Culture, Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor Weiss. Just wanted to remind members of council and the public that as you can see the heron along the Hoy Lake Road, it is an interesting sight, but please keep your distance. They definitely will not appreciate having human contact, and so the more distance we can keep, the better. I'm going to start putting my reports together probably online or something, and then if members of council have questions, they can direct them to me either in private or in the meeting. But I think that to save paper and to save time, I think that's probably what I'll be doing moving forward. That concludes my report.
That's a good idea, and that's what I typically try to do as well, so I'll make that vow as well for next meeting. Protective Services, Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Mayor Weiss. Today we wrapped up the third meeting dealing with the Oceanside Task Force on Homelessness for the new strategic plan going forward. And we're looking to have a town hall type meeting presenting this new or renewed strategic plan on the 28th of April. In our community hall from 3 to 5. I also had a meeting with the Mount Harrison Advisory Reserve where Kim Burton was also in attendance. And we're looking to attract an international event where different biosphere regions, regions across the world may come and attend. So we've given staff the indication that we would like to pursue this, and I think it'll be a wonderful event for our area. We had a select meeting on public safety organized for today, actually, but obviously we needed to adopt, at least as a council, refer the age-friendly transportation plan to that committee, which will then take place on March 25th. Thank you.
Thank you. That completes liaison reports. Staff reports. Daniel.
Thank you, Your Worship. Haley, if you could put up my slides. I know that Mr. Tim Pritchard would like to see from the beach in Mexico, he tells me. So I have an overview and update on our strategic plan. It's been a little while because I believe as we were running through the budget process, we didn't actually report out in December. So this one goes back almost 6 months. So I'm just going to provide an update and also talk overall what we've done statistically as well for 2019. It's just an opportunity to touch on those areas. So under improved governance, one of the ongoing objectives is protocols and procedures for council meetings. As council will recall, we have discussed this on a number of occasions, and at this point we are pushing back the next discussion to the first half of 2020. We're going to find an appropriate meeting to bring that forward, and staff will be bringing recommendations based on the conversations taking place thus far, and we'll continue along the path of amending that bylaw. Communication strategy. In November, council resolution directed staff to create a public input forum on communications at a committee of the whole meeting for summer of 2020, and so we are proceeding with the development of that forum and that plan. Under engage land for strategic local and regional initiatives, we have 4 key areas that we've been focusing on, being the airport, the East Village, the bus garage and Qualicum Commons, and the former St. Andrews park or site. Under the airport, we have had the public meeting that was held in September, and a report following up on that will be going forward to council in May of 2020. As I'll flag with council that this is an area that we've had significant dialogue with the province over, and there's it's an evolving world as the province also moves forward with various changes that were being implemented in Port Alberni and Campbell River. So as a group of airports on the island, we're all experiencing similar procedures. With East Village, this has been delayed until the completion of the site planning in collaboration with VIU and School District 69. The bus garage and the Qualicum Commons, similar to the East Village, we're working with VIU and School District 69. Planning overview is estimated to come to council next month, April of 2020, and following that, the East Village and the bus garage, I think, will be reopened for discussions. Former St. Andrews site, the concept plan is complete. It was adopted by council. Site preparations are currently taking place this month, so there's the little lodges that are being removed, and staff are also preparing an arborist report and a replanting plan, and that's going to be brought forward to council in the near future. I'm where do I reduce the volume here? It just feels like there's a lot of, is that better? I don't know. I feel like my voice is really bellowing. Is it okay? To address encroachments, if you could go to the next slide, thank you. Development of a summary report on encroachments is complete, and public discussion and enforcement is set to commence in the spring-summer of 2020. Staff have been working on letters that are going out and on discussion points that will have to be brought forward as council continues down this path. Increased diversity of housing. Here again, 4 key areas: housing needs assessment, housing task force, amenity contribution policy and DCC review, and plan and construct affordable housing project. So the housing needs assessment, there's internal data collection that has been completed for some time. We have been awaiting the RDN's completion of their information in order to put it all together. We've also issued a survey, and we're putting together our survey information, so there's a report that will be forthcoming to council in the near future with that information. The Housing Task Force, with everything that has been going on, the task force concept was linked to the needs assessment, so it's been paused there. And obviously housing itself in the community has not paused, but the task force, we're awaiting further direction from council once we have further information to share with council. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, but the housing needs assessment is certainly the first step. Amenity contribution policy and DCC review. The amenity contribution is complete. The DCC review is planned for this year, 2020. Plan and construct affordable housing project. As you will recall, we did a request for expression of interest. That was followed by a request for proposals for partners. Both of those are complete. A partner has been selected, and as we know on today's agenda as well, rezoning is underway. There is ongoing dialogue with Kiwanis and BC Housing as further opportunities present themselves, and we continue down the path of creating this housing initiative. Next slide, please. Mobility and alternative transportation. So upgrading and extending trails. As we know, the Memorial Separated Trail is scheduled for completion early this year. We're hoping come April that will be fully functional. The East-West Connector, which has also been the subject of much discussion, is also underway, and we expect to have that done this year in 2020. To attract new carriers to the airport, there are possible leads. These have stalled in some areas, so the discussion has paused. We are still, however, renegotiating long-term leases, and we still plan on amending and redeveloping our outreach plan for fall of 2020, so we can look at, with all the changes, how we're going to address and approach the airport. Airport terminal expansion. The final details of that project are nearing completion, and we expect to see that done prior to the commencements of the summer. Review speed limits and traffic calming. We've had open community discussion. That is complete. The age-friendly transportation plan is on the agenda tonight, March 2020, and we'll see what steps carry forward from there. Memorial Avenue upgrades. Substantial completion of work is on track for the end of this month, March 31st, 2020. Under grants, the town expects, I'm told, that we should be expecting an update from the province by Easter. And so, these big projects that I know everyone has been asking about, the Eagle Crest Roundabout being one of the large ones, the turf fields, I know all the sports fields are sports teams. Every time I go to a soccer game, they ask. The daycare as well is another one that has much anticipation, and then all of the ACAP landing lights, the East Village streetscapes, all these are still in progress. The only one we do have an update on, which we've previously shared, is that the rural dividend funding was cancelled for 2019. We don't have an indication of whether or not that's going to be a matter of resubmitting or what happens in 2020 at this time. Next slide, please. Effective provision of services, development of an asset management strategy. The strategy has been adopted, and now we're going to the next step, which is looking at these levels of service. We presented to council the first level of service, and we are working with the Municipal Insurance Association at completing the format. There is, as staff had flagged, we thought there might be a conflict between policy and a level of service document. MI agrees that that does create a conflict. So we'll be coming back with an amended version of that level of service and integrating into a single document. It'll be policy and level of service. The 5-year capital plan is complete. The 10-year capital plan has been deferred to this year's working plan, and of course is also contingent on the additional information Council wanted to consider with the asset management details. Strategic support and partnerships. Implemented a collaborative partnership with Parksville, Bylaw, and Fire last year. The Fire is continuing this year, as we know, working with the Parksville Fire Department, and appreciate the efforts of our Fire Chief, Marc Norris. Collaborative planning with VIU and School District 69. As reported earlier, that is something that came to us early in the year, and we think that that continues to play out well for us. And of course, we're going to get that report in April. Ongoing work with Health and the Perfect Storm Group and the Division of Family Practice. The RFP for the feasibility and business plan is nearing completion, so that should be issued shortly. And the ongoing discussion with the Division of Family Practice is still active, so that people do know that that is not a dormant file. It is ongoing meetings, and there's lots of work going on behalf of the division for this area. The continued work with the museum, Qualicum First Nations, the Chamber, the Downtown Business Association, which is now working, I'd say, more under the banner of the Chamber, the family physicians, the East Village owners. As we know, it shouldn't say CPOC right now, we're actually working with other municipalities around the legal ruling for plastic bags, working with the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Region, working with the Coastal Communities Social Procurement Initiative. That continues to move forward positively, and there are still further changes with tech and infilm as the province also looks at different funding mechanisms. So all of these areas continue to be areas where staff are meeting with these various groups and advancing the interest with different things coming forward at different times. Next slide, please. Now, obviously, we're still working on a lot of things. It doesn't mean we haven't completed quite a bit of things. And so it's just, I didn't want to have everything in blue and not anything in green. So some of the key areas that we did complete, we did revise our smoking bylaw. We did do some relocation of bus stops. And these are all related back to resolutions of council throughout the year. We did successfully weather a windstorm with a fully active warming center and EOC, and we did a regional debrief and a debrief with council. We revised the council schedule. We did additional washroom accessibility improvements in a number of locations. We did work with BMX, and we completed the site upgrades so they could host their tournament last summer. We updated the zoning bylaw. We updated long service recognition policies with the town. We did move forward with waste service transition. We have a new flag policy. We successfully collaborated with neighboring local governments and the school district on a number of different approaches. The council chambers, as we know, have been updated with new streaming technology, and these were all additional things that did occupy some of our time, and I wanted to give them a slide. Next slide, please. Quick statistics. So 2019 saw 525 resolutions of council. There were 374 regular council and 151 in camera. Of the 374 regular council resolutions, 87% are actually actioned and complete. 13% remain in progress. I thought it would be good to break those apart, and I do thank Haley for going through all of those resolutions to create the link. Much appreciated. So 59% of these resolutions were about our core business activities. So every time you see a development permit or a variance, that's all part of our core business. So 59% of those resolutions were about core. 30% were about our strategic objectives, things that are directly articulated in our strategic plan, and 11% were introducing new initiatives not previously identified in the plan. Of the 374 decisions, 12% were referrals and deferrals to dialogue venues and forums. I flag that one because it's one that we do have control over, both at a staff level and council. When I talk about process and planning, if we get the plan right and we all like the process up front and right, it doesn't get deferred or referred. And so that's a statistic I thought would be good for us to follow year on year to see how we're doing, whether we get it done once and done, or whether we're continuing to refer and defer. Next slide, please. 2020, so far we have 86 resolutions of council, 65 regular council, and 21 in camera. 35% have been actioned and completed, and 65% remain in progress. So here again, of the 65, there's 48% that advanced their core business activities, 23% that advanced their strategic objectives, and 29% are new objectives. So this is timely. I'll go to the next slide. And it's timely because really when we talk about the strategic plan, it really is the best opportunity to identify those new things and bounce them back to staff to talk about, can we fit them? What does it mean? What's the order of them? And it's an opportunity for us as staff to go back, sit down, revisit the plan, and report back to council to say, this is how we think we can do it all, and this is what we think we can do this year, and this is when we can do it. So the following are possible additions to the strategic plan, and in that they already exist as resolutions of council. Under improved governance, and I put these in categories, the council has not, so I'm certainly open to any comment from council along those lines. But we have a resolution to conduct a youth forum with the high school, and that would be a committee of the whole meeting. We have the code of conduct that has been on the books for a little while, following the procedure bylaw. When we're done that, we wanted to create a code of conduct. We have a communication form, which I've already flagged, so that one shouldn't be there. Sorry about that. Engage land for strategic and local regional initiatives. Here we have a capital works for phase 2 of the Seaside Nature Park. There's a resolution of council instructing staff to work with the community volunteers to advance that second phase. Construction of a new community daycare facility. It's grant reliant. I flag it because it would require outreach in terms of final location. The grant application identified a location around the Civic Center, and I think that community dialogue to finalize that location would likely be something that we wouldn't want to delay. We'd want to advance even in advance of receiving any notification from the province. Mobility and alternative transportation. Revisit the possible redraft of the traffic control bylaw. Report on sidewalk prioritization. Under effective provision of services, we have a report and discussion on bylaws, taxation, or otherwise to encourage the revitalization of our village core. I put this under effective provision of services. It would arguably be, with Mr. Burden in the room, something that we could also work with the chamber very closely with. There's 2 areas under asset management that we could expand, and that's the report on life cycle costs for new infrastructure, as well as the report on major asset classes, risk assessment, and costing. There's the creation of a new land sale and/or disposal policy, and there's the rebranding and wayfinding. Next slide, please. Final slide, folks. Additional objectives being advanced under strategic support and partnerships, review of the town's role in supporting cold weather shelters in the region, installation of a flow recorder on Beach Creek, the continued planning of a 8-lane track with School District 69 at the Bolinas location, the review of options to transition to an on-demand transit service to replace the 97 Eagle Crest and 98 Qualicum Beach routes, and that I would recommend is done with the RDN. Fire service review, this is something that we have commenced but is not yet on the strategic plan, so I believe it should be added. It's something we're doing in collaboration with Parksville, as well as the various fire services within the regional district, specifically Area 69 where we are. Negotiation of a new agreement with the Chamber of Commerce is something that, with the changes with the Chamber there, is something that we need to advance. And the report on legalization, monitoring, and enforcement of short-term vacation rentals. From there, Your Worship, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Well, I think I'll kick it off. I ran it by you quickly before, but I haven't run it by the rest of council. So we seem they have this in our OCP, but not in our strategic plan. And it's been brought up numerous times by members of our public, most specifically Lois Eaton. So I've been thinking about our climate-related objectives and want to run something by council. I see as being a bit of an unsung hero with regard to the environment and climate. If you look at our last 10 years, we've been redoing our storm infrastructure, building water storage capacity, building a huge rain garden. We built one of the most energy-efficient fire halls in Canada, recharged our water aquifer, Phase 3 Memorial, bought private property to make parks. We're building green shores, protect our waterfront. We're looking to manage plastic bags in town. We have a waterfront master plan, and the list goes on and on and on. I really think we don't do enough to celebrate the great things we have done, but also think we aren't articulating new targets. I think that it would be cool if we could get at least get us working together on some targets with environmental and climate. I'd like to kick this idea to staff and see what they would come up with. Seems to me we could do things like, in no particular order, solar panels on municipal buildings by, say, 2030. Maintain or increase parking, but let's make 25% or more for zero-emission vehicles. Can we aim to plant 400 trees, or even better, get 400 households to plant one tree on their property, and we'll match each tree by planting on private property with one on public? That'd be over 800 trees in a short period of time. Maybe we could look to work with developers and homeowners to set community-wide targets for building and converting to low-carbon homes. BC Hydro can do energy efficiency ratings for homes. It would be great if all homes in QB were energy rated. Then we could set targets and chase incentives to help you achieve that. Can we target building 7 kilometers of Green Shore Connect Memorial to our new Elizabeth Little Park by 2030? It's not a big stretch. We can do that. So what I'm going to do is make a notice of motion for the next meeting, so we don't have to discuss today, of course, that staff put something ambitious together for us to consider, and we could price it out and take the cost of 10-year plan to the community in the near future. Thank you very much. I'll pass this on to Heather for, thank you. Further discussion. Councillor Filmer.
Thank you, Mayor Weiss. First of all, Ms. Sailland, thank you for putting this presentation together. Sorry. Just as a comment, I would have preferred to have this in writing or added into our agenda so I could form questions. It's a little tough to form questions on the spot here as it's being presented to us. So if we are able to still get this in writing, especially for our residents to review again, or have it posted on the website or somewhat, so we can still have further dialogue, that would be great. I do just have a question of, on a couple slides back when we were talking about relating things to our strategic plan, I'll just start, it listed a whole bunch, but for the first one, there's youth forum and the code of conduct and communication forum. Do we have to add that into our strategic plan if it already matches our strategic plan? You know, a youth forum, code of conduct, communication forum all relates to improvement of governance. So does it have to be added into the strategic plan if it matches that title of the strategic plan of improving governance? So I guess just a question through the chair to staff. It just seems like we're going to create ourselves more work if we're having to amend our strategic plan to add these things when they already match the strategic plan.
Through the chair. Two things. The slides are now up, so yes, we loaded them up. The reason why I hadn't put them in is I thought the slides alone might create some confusion for people reading. They don't get the presentation, but they just see the slides. In the future, what I'll do is a written report to complement that slide, so it's a good recommendation. I'll do that. With regard to adding to these, the reason why I do recommend it is there's many things that will fall under these broad categories that we have. And the challenge that we have from a staff perspective is that if we don't articulate those things that will occupy enough time, so like a youth forum, there's going to be an education portion around it. We're going to work to make sure that we're sharing information. We're going to coordinate with the school. So it's not a huge task, but it's also not a small one, and it will occupy some staff time. So something like that being added so that we can report back on it and we can say whether or not we've succeeded, or when staff report, I'm asking them to report on their objectives under the plan, and you will evaluate me over time on our accomplishment of those elements that are in the plan. So I would like to see some of those larger elements articulated so that we can report accurately back to council, and also set a timeline so we know like if we're going to do the youth forum, we've got to do it before June. Otherwise, we fall into next year, and maybe we'll do it 2 years in a row, but we have to do it before June if we're going to succeed. So that's why I'm putting forward those things that were motions of council that I think really should occupy a place in the plan. In the absence of an articulated plan, it's hard for me to be held accountable and hard for me to hold staff accountable.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. I too am concerned about continually editing this plan. I think we either should have the plan define larger categories, which is what we do through our implementation and through our timelines, or we should be doing something that's maybe not a strategic plan but a work plan. To take our strategic plan and quarterly be amending it and adding stuff to it, I think shows a lack of focus and vision for where we want to be. I think that if we define larger pictures, larger goals, and then within that have a separate form for doing the day-to-day micromanagement stuff, I think that's fine. I think we're both looking at something similar, but this strategic plan took us several months to put together, and to quarterly start amending it and taking stuff out and adding stuff in, I think we actually should be taking things out of it, because when I look at the timeline part of the implementation, we're way behind schedule. And there are things in your slideshow which were not included that are in our timeline and were just omitted. So I think there definitely needs to be another forum for us to communicate better through you to staff, but I think amending the strategic plan is probably not the best way of doing that.
Daniel?
I agree there's many ways that we can do it. The platform, the reason why I put it in the strategic plan is that it is a regular check-in point for us, and our resolutions will hover around those objectives. We'll also adapt. I mean, the reality is that every community has new things that pop up, and we have to react. Whether this be, whether we report into the details of an operational plan or we stick to the strategic plan, I'm happy figuring that out with council, so we use the best tool that we're all happy with. The point is, I would like to have the ability to be able to come back to something and say, okay, with these new motions in the last quarter, this is where they fit, or this is what's sliding. And I don't think we did a good enough job reporting on that in 2019, and instead we just simply tried to increase the pace and do more and more and more. And so my concern is that if we did that for 4 years, we'll get into year 4 and we might be setting ourselves up for a huge letdown in terms of what we accomplish or not. So I think we're saying the same thing. The question will then be, what tool do we want? And I think there's a couple of ideas that we could come back with at a staff level if council wants, and we can talk about what that looks like.
Thank you. I can't help but feel that we're somewhat behind, and at no fault of our own. I think it is our own fault, actually. I think we're beating Vancouver with the number of motions we've had for staff. So I think we have to try our best to dial it in a little bit and be more specific to our strategic plan. Councillor Harrison. So
there's a few points just to make that was following up. Division of Family Practice, the last I heard they were negotiating with the province for the service plan. So that'll update how much funding our region gets for healthcare. So it'll be every community in Oceanside. So hopefully we hear back soon. I hope it's not out of school, but the way I understand the negotiation process, the Division of Family Practice says this is what we need, and then the province tells you what you get. So healthcare funds are very stretched across BC, to be fair to the province, so I do understand where they're coming from. Rural Dividend Fund, last I heard that's basically dead. Iced tea is where I asked Forest Lands Natural Resources. We had this signage grant through Rural Dividend Fund. You have this list of about 100 different funding programs for projects that were in that funding stream. Which one should we look at? And they suggested iced tea. So that's something we can follow up with iced tea just to see, does this even fit with your mandate? Does this work for you? If there's no fit, then there's no point in really following up. If there is a fit, then we can talk about, do we want to continue with what was going to be a chamber / town project or not? Plastic bags. In January, the City of Victoria actually sent a letter to the province to get approval from the Minister of the Environment for their plastic bag bylaw. If we want our bag bylaw to be enforceable as a bylaw, we're going to need that letter from the province. So it might be a good idea to do one last pass over the bylaw, just check to see if there's any weird wording that we could improve, maybe looking at new iterations, and also looking at what the City of Victoria is doing themselves. And then just request that letter from the Minister of the Environment. If we don't hear back, we don't hear back, but that's the only way to make it legally enforceable at present. And just to reiterate, There was another Times columnist article in January. City of Vancouver is about 350 motions. City of Victoria is, and I have here quotes for how I describe it, as they have an engaged council, I think is the polite term. They have 657. But our staff levels relative to Vancouver and Victoria are not that high as a town of 9,000 people. So I do want to highlight when we're passing over 500 motions, some of these are just that we'll talk about something we talked about, and it's very, very straightforward. But we do want to be cautious as to how much we load up the docket because it makes it very difficult to execute on the strategic plan. And the last point, I would agree with Councillor Walker that quarterly updates to our strategic plan would be inappropriate, but it might make sense to look at things on an annual basis, sort of to line it up with a budget, because changing strategic plan priorities will have impacts on our budget potentially. So there is some merit to having those two conversations simultaneously. Whether it's through a work plan or amending the strategic plan, I don't know. It's a good conversation there. But I do think as we start adding things or taking things off, that'll have budgetary implications. So it's good to overlap those two conversations.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor Weiss. I've got a couple of notes here that I took. One is during the presentation, there was some comments that the school district, not the school district, VIU was going to make a presentation to council. And on one slide it said in April, and in another slide it said the presentation is going to be in May to this council. Do we know which meeting and in what format that will be coming to council?
April is where VIU comes, and I'll let Mr. Sales speak to the form. The reason why May was in there as the confusion is I wanted a month of time between the VIU presentation and our staff presentation to council. I think there'll be a difference between what VIU presents and what we come back with to say this is how we think it'll fit. So I was doing a 1 month time lapse in there, which is why the confusion came into play. Mr. Sales, do you have anything to add to that?
That summarizes the overall process. The one thing I would add is that we are looking at a few potential dates in April. A committee of the whole would be one good venue for them to make a presentation. So if that works out with the April committee of the whole date, then that would be the best. But it also depends on their availability. So it's ongoing discussion, and we'll let council and the public know as soon as possible.
I suggest you catch them before they go on summer vacation. Councillor Harrison.
Sorry, I just remembered one last thing too, housing needs assessment. So I did reach out to the RDN, the planner who's actually handling that. They said they've received their final report and it was going to be on the January or February agenda for the RDN board. It was not on the January or February agenda. And I sort of sent an email back, you know, it's kind of important for us. We're having some very important conversations right now. Because the key component of the RDN study is the population projections. Everything else, like the current census data, we can mine that, that's fine. But there's a particular skill set for doing population projections, which historically also too, some of the population projections from BC Stats and other sources have been optimistic about the growth of the working age population for Oceanside, which has proven to be inaccurate. But it is a vital component of the housing needs study that are legislated now by provincial law. You have to have that now at a regional district level. So that's what we're waiting on, and I don't have a net timeline for when that'll be done, but apparently the RDN does have the final iteration of that report. When it comes to the board, then it'll be sent to our staff for review, and hopefully we'll be able to share that information with everyone in town.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor Weiss. I wrote a note down here that I would appreciate a written report as well as potentially the timelines that we were hoping to meet, and then new projected timelines. The strategic plan has a timeline where everything is, and we did that over a year ago. Those have all changed, and so it would be relevant for us to know, and possibly in a committee whole format, to maybe reassess the priorities for some of these items to make sure others come forward. The other thing mentioned in committee of the whole is the motion of council was that this update would take place in a committee of the whole. That was the amendment to the strategic plan that was made and adopted to this council. And as far as I understand, it's the will of council unless we change otherwise. So to withhold council from the written report and to have it in this type of a format, it deprives the community of being able to ask questions as to where we are in the strategic plan, because they can't even ask us questions because we don't even have the written report. So I'm hoping that moving forward we can have these in a committee of the whole format, as well as having the written report well in advance so we can all have discussion on that.
Daniel.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the strategic plan is accessible to the community and it is online. Where amendments take place, they are discussed with council, and the only amendments that are really presented here are resolutions of council that already exist. So I would argue that the public, if the public has anything to bring up about the strategic plan, they can certainly do so through a number of different venues. They can write council from what they see online. They can contact staff to discuss any issues. Certainly at the end of every council meeting, whenever new resolutions come forward, they have actually in the past brought up and asked how it fits or where it goes. So I think along those lines, the public does have access to the plan and does have the ability to comment. The last presentation I made was at a committee of the whole. It was September 16th was the last presentation. I do believe coming out of that meeting, we were targeting a council meeting and then we'd go back to a committee of the whole. My understanding is that we are going in and out of that larger forum. I will double check. If I'm incorrect, then we'll keep it at a committee of the whole, and that's okay. I do also flag that one of the key components that is going to influence this is the budget. And once we have a completed budget, then we're a little more firm on coming back and showing and adjusting those timelines. Until we have that budget, it's hard for us as staff to come in and give you a definitive new timeline. We can certainly point to why it is certain things are delayed, and I flagged some of the exchanges with the province and whatnot around the airport. But more importantly, that I agree with you that the question is, when are we going to get it done then? What I'm saying is we need a budget to firm up those timelines, and then we'll give you a revised timeline for discussion. If council wants to receive that at a committee of the whole, we can certainly do that, and that's something I'll raise at the CAO update when we talk about upcoming agendas.
Councillor Walker.
Just for clarity, the lack of information to the public is not the plan or the amendments. The lack of clarity, I think, is just our progress on that. So the last meeting we had was about 6 months ago, and for the community to know where we are with these strategic initiatives, the plan is online, and there's lots of things that say will be completed 6 months ago that we have yet to even start on for some of them. But the update that shows where we're at with these and the new timelines, that's what I'm concerned about for the community to have access to in a written form.
Daniel.
Completely agree, and it does take time to put that together, and there again, depending on the time available to staff and the needs. Like I said, ideally we would have presented around December. We did not this year. We had focused on the budget instead, and we did quite a bit of additional work around asset management to bring information forward. I know Mr. Marsh did a great job presenting that, but I will flag that it was all hands on deck with staff to get that information. Mr. Marsh was the spokesperson, but it is the entire management team that brought that forward, and that would explain the delay for the report in December. Beyond that, there are fantastic software tools that I would recommend, and I would love actually, if council wanted to entertain it, I would produce a report that points to some software that the town could utilize that actually maintains a live dashboard so the public can go on and see as staff adds things to the objectives, the live dashboard simply updates and the public can check in and see where we're at. It's a fantastic tool. Of course, it comes at a cost, but it is, if we wanted something that was really completely up to date without having to wait for meetings, I would recommend we look at some of this software as a good tool for us.
Worthy of a discussion for sure. Councillor Walker.
Anyway, Reese, I've highlighted about a dozen different motions through this list, so if there's nothing on the report, I'm hoping to run through these real quick.
Sorry, is this for the Heather's report?
The strategic plan update. Oh, it is for the next one. No, this is a part of the strategic plan update, I assume. The following motions. No, it's this list of, we got like 20 pages of council motions.
Announcement of council meeting motions of Heather's. That's on the next topic.
Perfect. Well, that's all I have for the strategic plan update.
Any further questions on the strategic plan? Seeing none, we'll move on. Announcement of council meeting motions. Heather.
Thank you. So there's 5 motions that were received in the in-camera meeting that are before you. I'm not going to read them all out, but they're form part of the agenda. Page 24 to 66 is the motions index update from 2019 and 2020. and they are there for information unless you have motions.
Councillor Walker.
Jumping right in. Page 24, we've got one here that's motion 3. That is that, and it's a long motion, but the most of it is that council support on funding phase 2 for the Fay Memorial project. That's supposed to be in our 2019 budget, and so through the chair to staff, I'm just wondering if that has been included in the 2020 budget or when we will be discussing this.
So that motion was part of Daniel's strategic plan update, so that's just an item that's on the docket to add to staff's workload. There is no budget for it because we haven't determined the amount that the group has asked for. So once we enter into dialogue with the group, we'll be able to determine what portion they're wanting as a town portion and what portion they can do from fundraising or volunteer work.
Councillor Walker.
Mr. Mayor, that solves that one. Yeah, that was just from January of last year, so hopefully we can move that forward. It'd be nice to, I know one of their initiatives was they want to see a washroom down there, and we don't have a very good track record with public washrooms, and we now have a park nearby that will also be getting a washroom, so it just sits on the docket, I guess, for the time being. Next one is motion 7 there, 19-007, and this is about, say, having council direct staff to research the feasibility options cost to install a yellow flashing hidden intersection sign westbound on Village Way. We have our director of engineering here. If we can get a verbal update, perhaps maybe we can either just rescind this motion or give different advice. So through the chair to staff, if I can get a verbal update on that one.
That motion was referred to Richard Udall at the time of this update that I'm going to present on, and he recommended against it.
Councillor Walker.
Mr. Mayor, we've heard multiple times now that this is probably not the best option for that intersection, so I did not make that motion, but if the person who moved that motion could rescind that, perhaps we can save a staff report and get one less motion on our list.
Councillor Harrison.
I just point to our agenda. The age-friendly transportation plan is going to be referred to protective services anyways, I believe, is this recommendation, which seems pretty reasonable. That was a conversation we had at the CO update. Might be something for them to highlight and look at as well and get their feedback before we do any staff reports. Just because it might be something that we could get some more information on before we actually start using staff time. I think it does make a bit of sense to do everything with traffic all in one fell swoop as opposed to piecemeal.
Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you. There's a number of items in the strategic on the age-friendly traffic plan, and I was hoping that council would defer it to the Select Committee on Public Safety for their input, and with that input, bring it back to a future council meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. On motion 7 that we're talking about right now, it's been over a year since that motion was made. So I guess I don't mean to be critical, but a question through the chair to staff. Why hasn't that report come forward? If it has gone to Richard, that discussion has happened, and all the motion is saying is for a report to come back to us. Why hasn't that report come back if the research has been done and the conversation has happened? Why hasn't the report been formulated and brought back to council?
Daniel.
I think in this case, because of the various forms that we jumped through for the age-friendly transportation plan, I think it was simply overlooked. And that this is part of the process of going through, is that it's shifted to a form. We have that discussion. Mr. Weir looks at the alternatives coming forward, and I think that one item was simply overlooked. And so it will be brought back forward, and we will either report on it after today or consider rescinding it, depending on the will of council.
I'm the one who made that motion, I'm sure. So I'm not sure I want to rescind it just yet, but I will definitely take it into consideration maybe for the next meeting. I just need to toss it around before I make that decision, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a few more here. Page 28. This was that we were referring a presentation that came to council February of last year regarding drinking water and watershed protection, that it be referred to the Select Committee on Environment and Sustainability. Instead of perhaps having staff generate a report on that motion. Perhaps it's more relevant that we just send that presentation. It's a little while ago now, but perhaps we send that presentation to the Environment Committee and get some feedback from them as to what they think we should be doing with that.
I think it's a good idea. Do we need to do that in a motion? Yet another one?
I think I made that motion, so we can make it a friendly amendment.
So be it. Daniel?
I think if we leave it as is, my understanding and my recollection is that Mr. Weir did want to comment on that prior to going to the Environment Committee. So I think either we just advance it as is, as you're saying, which we can do nonetheless. The motion I would leave as is, and Mr. Weir can speak to the Environment Committee on additional items and then come back for a report. Or we can do a friendly amendment, but I don't know that we need one. Mr. Weir, do you have any comments around it?
I'm actually on the Technical Advisory Committee of that committee, so, or of this RDN project. We are actively involved in it. We support it financially. I don't really think that there's a lot that really needs to be reported on. They have just adopted a new 10-year plan. We can certainly bring back a report maybe after the end of March, given my project load right now, and present that to council. Certainly no problem. We're certainly on top of it, especially with my participation in that committee.
I think the confusion is when it says in progress. So this is, of course, is an ongoing committee. And actually, I overlooked it. It was actually the RDN one. So this is going to be going. This will continue to go on for years. So it'll always be in progress. So I'm not sure where we, as this council, go with this. If the RDN and our engineer is content with what's happening, it wouldn't hurt maybe for you to make a presentation to the Environment Committee to keep them up to date on what's going on. Councillor Walker, you seem to be.
Thank you. We received a presentation from the RDN, and as a council, weren't really sure what the next steps were, so we referred that to that committee with the intention of them being able to suss out what the next steps are. So if that presentation or a similar presentation, or perhaps their strategic plan or 10-year plan, whichever document that is gets referred to that committee for recommendations, I think that's within sort of the bounds of the motion. I just want to see something get moved to that committee, get it back to us without having our Director of Engineering spending substantial time on a report. But I also want to make sure it's productive. So what goes to that committee, that if they can have some clear goals and come back to this council with something that provides value for the community.
Thank you. I think we're good with that, aren't we? I don't think there has to be a motion. Daniel?
So for clarity, we will advance the report to the Environment Committee and then report back afterwards. That's what I'm hearing is okay. I'm looking at you, Mr. Weir, to make sure. It'd be easier for us to advance it that way and have the conversation at the committee, especially given the workload that currently exists. Okay. So we're clear on that understanding, so we'll advance it and then report.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor Weiss. Next one, page 38, motion 148. This is that council directs staff to prepare a vegetation plan for the property located at 478 Timberlane Place, the cost of which to be covered from the proceeds of the sale of the property, the maximum of $5,000. Driving by that site, it's looking pretty good, and I'm just wondering why this is marked as an in-progress motion through the chair.
Daniel? Oh, Luke, sorry.
So there's two components to this. One is the work immediately in front of the project, 478, and in collaboration with the developers on that property, that vegetation work has been done. 1,000 of the 5,000 has been withheld because there's an intention to continue the planting further to the east across the other property, and so that work is not done. So it's substantially complete, but there's still work to be done in the fall at the appropriate planting time.
And it does look very good. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I've written down page 45 here, member of the council. This was, what is this? Oh, this is the committee of the whole, so motion 204. This is the committee of the whole session with the local high school here. In an effort to save staff some time, I'm wondering if a member of council should take some initiative on that and do some of the legwork. I'd like to see this move forward, and through the chair to staff, I'm just wondering what the best way to ensure that moves forward in a timely way would be.
Daniel.
I think we are planning on coordinating with Councillor Harrison on that one, and he's already done some background work. There are resources through the Local Government Management Association, and just, when was it now? The end of February, I flagged this with the association asking for any resources that other communities might have. I am waiting for those to come in. I'm told that other communities had them, and so I was hoping once I receive those, then we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and we can go to the to Lisa, the principal at the school, at the high school, and say, look, this is some of the learning tools that we'd like to use, so at least the students have some background, and then when we get to a meeting, it's more of a learning experience as opposed to drinking from a fire hose sort of thing. So that was the intent there, and I'm thinking that the word, I think it was Councillor Harrison who brought it up. Am I incorrect with that, or is Councillor Filmer, sorry, there we go. So I apologize, Councillor Filmer. I know that there was an elected official involved. I thought it was Councillor Harrison. But anyway, I'm gathering that information with the Local Government Management Association at this time.
Councillor Filmer.
Yeah, thank you. On that note, it troubles me because we talk about a youth forum. Now, I believe KSS this year has formed a youth council. Well, they've always had the leadership group because I was a part of it, no surprise. But I was under the impression that they also had a youth council going, but that might be wrong. But when we started, like the city of Parksville, they went and they just conducted a council meeting in the high school just for the students to observe and understand what they're doing, and understand we're trying to take it the step further. But maybe we could shove that one down the road a bit and aim it for 2021 or 2022 and just conduct one of our meetings in the school, just for them to at least start to witness how we do our business. So just a thought there, because this is going to take a lot more time. They're going into spring break now, and then they've got barely 2 months left and they're gone. So we might have to amend this idea and push it down the road a bit.
I don't disagree with that. I think if you're going to do it in the way you've spoken of, you should do it right. So, Councillor Harrison.
And just to clarify, yes, I did reach out to the school district board in August and sort of go over this motion and say, hey, this is something we passed. So do pay attention. The intention is to create something where it isn't necessarily 3 people, because I found actually being in a classroom, like I've actually taught for a living for a few years, sometimes the best feedback is from the last student you'd expect. The guy with the backwards Canucks hat on could actually have the most insightful comment about Hamlet in the whole class, so you never know. So that's why you want to broaden the range of people who show up. I've also sent an email to the principal of KSS as well in September of this last year. But I do think that you're right, that with the timelines now, with spring break being done, and they really got to hammer in on getting their school year done, maybe it's something we talk about over the summer and make sure we get it right done next year.
Councillor Walk. Oh, sorry, Councillor Filmer.
So with that being said, maybe we could amend this motion to striking 2020 and and amend that one, and then let's just, before the school year ends, just go in, just conduct one of our meetings, and allow whatever students and teachers want to bring their classes in to attend, can attend, of course, with coordination of the principal. I also don't want to be forcing students that don't want to watch us sit here and do this, sit there and watch us do this, because everyone here, they come here because they want to, I hope. But as students, if they're going to be sitting there watching us, it's going to be terrible. So maybe we can amend this, strike 2020, and move in and just conduct a meeting there at the end of this school year.
Need to make that formal. Councillor Harrison.
So if I could just then, I'd accept a friendly amendment instead of in the 2019-2020 school year, just in the future. And then it's clear, at some point.
In the future.
And then if we can add in there that we'll be conducting a meeting there this school year.
Daniel.
I think it would be good just to add that clarity, that we want one meeting in this school year and then a further forum to the 2021 year.
Is that what Councillor Filmer asked for? I thought we'd try to move everything to the next year.
No, that hits the dot there. Just do a simple meeting there this year, and then do an actual forum with them next year.
Very good, just making sure. Councillor Walker. You're done? Just wishing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So next is page 49, motion 250.
Can we just vote on that motion?
Yeah.
I didn't think it was a motion. I thought it was just an amendment, a friendly amendment. That we will vote on it. I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Where were we? Councillor Walker.
Thank you. Page 49, motion 251. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This one is that staff be directed to forward the application for 103 Railway Street to a future committee of the whole meeting. This was made in August of last year, and through the chair to staff, I'm just wondering where this, I was excited when this development application came forward, and I'm just wondering through the chair to staff where that application is at.
Yes, you'll notice that the immediately preceding motion of council was to refer it to the Advisory Planning Commission. So just recently, we have received all that information, and an APC meeting has been set. So coming out of the APC meeting, the direction is clearly to take it to committee of the whole. So that will be coming.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Next page, page 50, motion 260. This was the one about Orca Place. I'm just looking for an update, if I can, through the chair to staff or to Councillor Harrison, if there has been any progress in this work sharing opportunity that was discussed in September.
Councillor Harrison.
So I have at Coulson at the year, some of the people from ICCS who run Orca Place were there. They don't have a work program yet. It would probably be done in conjunction with the Career Center. And it's something right now, they just want to make sure they actually run the site well and that there's no hiccups instead of trying to do 10 things at once. And so I would expect it to be a conversation we have in the next year. And then we'd want to also flag it with our union, just make sure that we're clear on what the intent is. Here is just 1 or 2 people a year maybe to get them a job reference that's current and help people find work in the private sector afterwards. But I would expect that to be maybe a conversation like late summer, maybe early autumn, but I'm not sure yet because that depends on their timelines.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Next is page 51. There are 2 motions here, 279 and 280, that were a part of a very lengthy discussion about our procedure bylaw. And if they were both rescinded as a block, I think that would probably be most appropriate. The first one is to eliminate Robert's rules from our procedure rules. And the second one is directing staff to rewrite Robert's rules. I think if we took a big step back and maybe started that process again, that would probably benefit everyone, and if they could be rescinded as a block, that would be great.
I don't. Councillor Harrison.
I'm not sure about that. There's actually some follow-up conversations. So for example, 19280 is actually per Robert's rules a motion that isn't in order. You're not allowed to make a motion which has been countermanded by a previous motion in the same meeting under Robert's rules. So I think this is just a broader conversation we need to have about the whole procedure bylaw tout court. And I think we're better served having all those conversations at once as opposed to taking things out now. So I think that maybe let's have some more conversation about where we want to go with the procedure bylaw, bring it back to first reading if need be, and start from there, as opposed to rescinding a couple things from, I think it was at second reading when we left off, or still first? Okay. But yeah, I think there's maybe we should just sort of leave it there and do it all at once, as opposed to doing half of it now, half of it later.
Councillor Walker.
And these sorts of discussions are what I'm hoping to avoid. If we can have, I mean, this staff report where they have to present a lot of this information is going to be a nightmare. And then we're going to continue the discussion and possibly confuse it further. I don't think that the changes that we need to make to our procedure bylaw are going to be substantial, but I think having these 2 motions on the book is going to make it complicated when we do bring things back. And I think the staff report that's going to come back as relating to these 2 motions, I think will take a lot of time. I'm just guessing. Maybe if staff wants to comment on that, that would be great.
Heather?
I don't want to get involved in council debate, but it is true that the motions that are on the books, Danielle and Haley and I have met on this, and it does create a lot of work. We were going to potentially propose just doing a new draft. Now that council's had a chance since you've been elected to, get settled in and see what actually will help things progress, because things have been going well. And so just coming up with those items that council, does want to use on a regular basis, the terminology for the different, laying motions on the table or deferring or referring. So that was going to be a suggestion of staff rather than rewriting the way it's here, is just coming back because it is only at first reading, coming back with a draft as we initially had intended to put out.
Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Maryse. I think you articulated what was the intent of that motion regarding Robert's Rules of Order. And I think we can understand that. What you had in mind, it was simple. It had the basic parameters of how to conduct a meeting without having to use a book of 800 pages to figure out how to run a meeting. I think what you were proposing and what I thought we understood is how we run a meeting and have been for as long as I've been on this council, very efficiently. So I think we don't need to strike this. I think we need to review our procedure bylaw as this part of our strategic plan, part of our work plan that is coming back, and I think we leave it at that. But I think staff can draw some pretty clear conclusions as to what you said in the interview, which I think articulated the situation really well. Thank you.
Daniel.
I'll offer a compromise in this discussion, in that, as Ms. Svensen said and as Councillor Westbrook has said, we do intend on coming forward with some alternatives and some summaries. Perhaps in that report we can have as one of the alternatives the rescinding of these two motions in there as part of the process, seeing as I don't doubt that we are going to redraft some of the language around the intent as opposed to using the specific motions. So with that, perhaps I can recommend that we leave it as such, knowing that we'll come back with a recommendation to rescind them in the future once you see the full report. It's an alternative.
I'm good with that. Councillor Felber.
Thank you. Well, I look forward to that debate. With saying that, it's a question that's going to refer back to the presentation you gave to us earlier, where this has really been pushed back a lot, and we're now looking at August, and I guess why? Why are we waiting this long for that?
Daniel?
We've had a lot of dialogue and discussion, and I think as a group, both with staff and council, we've worked at elements of the relationship and our dynamic, and I think that was an important part of bringing the procedure bylaw back to light. And I would say that's probably one of the largest reasons why we reprioritized other things and advanced them under the admin banner, so that was the other element. But I think if I recall, the last debate that we had around this was quite heated, and I think all of council was ready for a cooling period prior to bringing the subject back. In the meantime, we still have a procedure bylaw that's in effect, and so we're still running, and so this is why it's been pushed back and reprioritized.
Quite successfully, I might add. So I think the compromise is a good one. Bring back the draft, and then in that report, we'll look at rescinding these at that point in time once we have a chance to look at it. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, my goal is to take things that are on the staff list that probably don't need to be on the staff list. Next one is page 53, motion 302. This is directing staff to legalize, monitor, and enforce short-term vacation rentals. I'm not going to make a motion to rescind that, but being that is going to be a very time-consuming task for our planning department, which is quite stretched, and being that I'm assuming the timelines on this are not defined, that may be something worth rescinding if the mover of that wanted to rescind that and maybe bring it back when we've got a little more capacity.
Councillor Harrison.
I don't think it's necessary to rescind. I just think it's clear that it's not the immediate priority for the community. There are several people in the community who are very concerned about this issue, and this is their number one issue. So I think it's fair to keep this on the docket for now, but just have an understanding, like, let's get the key projects in our strategic plan going first, and then when we have time, we'll get to this later. I would say that maybe not in the next few months, but maybe later on in the summer, you can start having this conversation, because you want to give people enough time so that when they're starting to book rooms for the summer, if that's something they want to do, they'll know what the legal landscape is in town. Just so that way there's a little bit of clarity. The Tourism Association is on board with this. This is pretty much in line with what they're looking for, where you just create a level playing field with everyone. So people who are full-time B&Bs, every bit as much as short-term, it's the same business registration, same rules. So I don't think rescinding it would make much sense.
Whoa. I was going to go first. I think this one here, I would like to actually see on this list another column that we could actually have a projected completion date. I understand where you're coming from with that. It's been on here for a long time. But if a projected completion date is whenever, or, you know, in the future, sometime in the future, whatever that looks like, it doesn't become a, oh, we didn't get to it thing. So I think that'd be a good column to add. Councillor Filmer, then I think it was Councillor Harrison.
Okay, thank you. I guess it's just a question, who made that motion? Because it was either the recommendation, either that you made that motion, that I made the motion, because we were talking about Airbnbs. So it would be good to get clarification on that. But if you made the motion, then I can't do anything. But I was under the impression that I might have also made the motion. So I guess I'm a little lost there. If I made the motion, I'll be happy to rescind it.
Councillor Walker.
Perhaps through the chair to staff, if we could get an update on this and potential timelines, if we keep our work setting as it is right now, when likely this will get gotten to and what that could look like.
Just to refresh everyone on where this discussion came from, staff brought forward a report sort of informing council on the current status of short-term vacation rentals, which is that they are not legal in almost all residential areas. The recommendation was to maintain that. The council was very interested in seeing some sort of a way that some of them could be legalized. That does require a lot of discussion. So in answer to your question, the strategic plan is very clear. It does mention short-term vacation rentals and that it should be addressed as time permits. So I think the answer to your question is, once we've dealt with other council priorities, then we'll relook at this one.
Councillor Walker.
These types of motions that will sit on the books for probably, I'm assuming, well over a year. I mean, this will take an OCP amendment for us to go forward with this. The OCP says specifically that we will not allow vacation rent or short-term vacation rentals in the OCP. So this type of a motion where we say, oh, we'll get to it when we get to it, probably better that we rescind this and have this on our own internal list than 4 times a year discuss where are we at with this.
Luke?
If council wants to take it off the list, that's fine. I don't think anyone's losing sleep over it being on the list, but it's not on the top. Let's just say that.
I know it's been a debate that I've had in town numerous times about whether we allow it or don't allow it. The problem is, I see both sides. I see people that are very low income pension-wise that are actually subsidizing their lives with this other accommodation they have, right or wrong. And I see people that are affected by rowdy ones that don't live nearby and are not happy with it. And then we have the third component is we've lost a lot of our hotel capacity in town to condos, whatever. So we're one of the only resort communities that has very little resort property. So I understand that all. So I'm not sure what the answer is. I understand what the OCP says. I understand the direction of this motion. And quite frankly, it's a tough one to deal with in the near future. I'm okay to leave it on the books. Then we'll get to it when we get to it. And further discussion, Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I only have a couple more of these. Page 56, motion 349 is directing staff to look at a report for recommendations for future public meeting regarding how to better communicate with the Qualicum First Nation and the Snanaws. This was made not that long ago. It's only 3 months ago, but I'm thinking perhaps, Mr. Mayor, if you would like to reach out to the two chiefs for both of these First Nations, perhaps we can turn that into something that council takes on as opposed to something that staff takes on.
I have had numerous conversations with Chief Calma. We're not at the council-to-council meeting as of yet. I'm already happy with Michael. I think when he decides he wants something, he makes the phone call, and vice versa. Him and I had breakfast last week, and he asked me this week to get the fountain going as soon as possible. So, well, we don't do proclamations, so, but kidney, 3 days kidney day is coming up very soon, and he would like the fountain going for that. So I made the recommendation to staff that if it's not going to get too cold, which I'm not so sure it's not going to, that we get the council, we get that thing running. As far as the news, we have been invited there as a delegation, so we're getting through that, and I'll update you when I have more information on that. But there is things moving forward. Thank you, Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to go as a delegation. I think that'd be great on their territory to come and participate with them. The motion was simply to figure out how to communicate our agendas with the two local First Nations that are our neighbors, and perhaps just a face-to-face meeting with both chiefs saying, these are when our meetings are, these are when our committee of the wholes are. How would you like to be informed about what it is that we're doing? I think it's important. We had an issue some time back with the SNOS as related to the Island Corridor Foundation, and I think this is something that council can step up, or the mayor can step up and do something that will then take a burden off of town staff.
Two things. I have spoken to Chief Calma about that. And he says, I don't need anything special. He goes, I go online and I find out. So that part is good. The other one, they just elected a new council. I think we were waiting for that. That was a month ago? Yeah, so we were waiting for that to happen. So I will, to address your concern, reach out and see what's going on there. I haven't met the new council or the new chief yet, but I most certainly will. Councillor Harrison.
Just a couple of points. One, if we wanted to be really pedantic, we're also on the shared territory for the Comox First Nation. If you go on to their website and you look at what they say is their traditional territory, it does include Qualicum Beach as well. And the second point is that I'm not aware it was the Snanaws First Nation. I'm only aware of a phone call from one member of council. So I'm unaware of any formal communication from Snanaws First Nation about any issue with ICF at present.
Either way, it's something I need to get done, so I will reach out. You know, this traditional territory map that I've seen different versions of over the last year and a half. It depends who you talk to exactly where the map sits. Qualicum First Nations is very adamant that we're definitely sitting on their territory, and the chats to the big house from a couple, I'm not sure the time frame, years ago, it was the Englishman River on that side that sort of split the two. So anyway, I'm not going to go down that road today. I think that I will, as to your comments, I'll reach out, and I'll reach out and I'll bring it back to the next meeting. Okay. Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. Well, the more the merrier. If we can get all 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, let's have the meeting. I think the one, and I don't mean to be critical here, but our former mayor said they were having the discussion, and now our current mayor is saying we're going to have the discussion. And 3 months ago, when I brought a motion forward to start recognizing their land, this council got upset with me and said, no, we are putting our trust in the person that represents us to have these conversations, and now we're having the conversation again. So when it comes down to it, we're having the discussion of, you said you're going to reach out and contact, and that it's coming back to us. So I'm hoping that these conversations will happen and that it will come back to our next meeting.
Councillor Harrison.
You know, the last conversation I was aware at was at the Wounded Warriors. Chief Michael O'Connell was there, the mayor was there, and I was there. So I think also, too, there's a little bit of a mischaracterization of the conversation. The conversation was you wanted to essentially amend our procedure bylaw while we're undergoing a process of reviewing our procedure bylaw. So you can't do one spot amendment on procedure bylaw. I don't think it's a good idea to do that when we're still discussing it. So it wasn't that there wasn't a conversation, it's that it was a procedural matter. And as far as I'm aware, the conversations with the mayor and Chief Michael have certainly been ongoing. It sounds like we're in contact with Snanas, and it's not too hard to reach out to Comox. Those are the 3 First Nations which have shared territory. Snanas through the Temoch Agreement in Principle, the territory they drew in 1994. Comox, I'm not sure when those boundaries were set, and Qualicum First Nation is pretty self-evident. So I don't think it's something where we really need to be concerned. It's just we need to keep making the effort and listening to what people have to say.
Thank you. Moving on. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Page 59, first motion of the year, was regarding to potential upgrades at Crystalton Park. And I don't know, I guess through the chair to Councillor Filmer, I'm not sure if that came up with the Parks and Rec committee, but I'm just wondering, I vaguely recall this motion being made, but I don't know what recommendations they were actually looking for. So perhaps some comment on that would be good.
Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. The committee was as confused as you. They came forward, we tried, we did have representatives from the Qualicum Woods Residents Association come forward and make a presentation to us that did clarify pieces of it to us. From that, the committee did make recommendations that will come back to council. And it just basically relates to giving an updated piece of equipment on the park. That's the gist of it. Is the equipment that's there is extremely outdated and no longer safe, that the community feels is no longer safe. So the recommendation that will come to council is basically just to look at what we can do equipment-wise to put a safer and newer piece of equipment on the park.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you. Just 2 more here. The second one down is that the mayor sent a letter to the school district indicating their support for the track. That was made in January. I'm just wondering if that, to the chair, I guess, if that letter has indeed been sent.
I believe that is sent. Daniel.
I'm not sure if we sent the letter. I'll double check that one. However, we've been abundantly clear with the board at the table at those meetings of our support. So I will double check that one. I think if that one's still in progress, we maybe didn't send a letter, but I'm looking at Kim. Did we give a letter? At the last meeting, we certainly were very clear in terms of the position of this council and the support of the track.
And my apologies, you think I'd remember, but after a council meeting, they bring 6, 7 letters. It's just like Radar O'Reilly, like away they go. So I do read them in all truthfulness, but I'm sure I sent that one. But I honestly can't remember. Councillor Harrison.
And if you want, I can follow up with the track committee just to double check. They're aware of the motion, they know it's passed, but if they want a hard copy, the school district is actively trying to look at grants to take the money they've invested. So the school district is putting in half their capital reserves for that project. And they're looking to go to both the private sector, nonprofits, and government to get matching grant monies. And they did say that having a letter saying, hey, we support this, and just in principle even, does help with some of those grant applications.
Councillor Walker.
That's actually all I had. I was hoping that we could take some of these off of staff's list, but maybe in 3 months from now we'll do it again.
I'm hoping in 3 months you won't have to. So, Councillor Harrison.
So I'm only going to do one, I swear. And it's an older one. Where is it? Motion 21, 19-021. That's on page 25. And that's about the transit on demand. Is that still something we're looking at doing? I thought that was something that we weren't going to do as per the last council meeting.
Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you. We had that discussion, and Mr. Trudeau is probably more knowledgeable about transit in our area than anybody else I know. And we did try that system actually at one time, but it was not successful. We can try it again, and perhaps in a slightly different variation, but it stands to reason that when you have a route and then somebody called and said, can I get picked up at my place, that it's going to throw the schedule off. So that was the issue, that if you have a scheduled route, and what we thought we could do is have this hourly service around town, on the hour, every hour it seems, and people can use it that way. But to call people or answer people's call to be taken off, take the bus off that route causes problems. Now, perhaps Mr. Trudeau can remind me when that actually happened and why that didn't seem to be successful.
Through the chair, yeah, it was about 12 years ago where we did look at that, and the problem was it made the schedule not work too well, and we weren't too efficient picking people up. The challenge for any transit system in a community in BC is that it's quite expensive, and if you don't involve BC Transit, you don't get the subsidy. BC Transit subsidize transit systems anywhere from near 60% to 53%. So any study or any analysis of a system, bringing BC Transit into it, because if they don't approve it, you're not going to get that subsidy. I have talked to the RDN Transit, and that is going to be reviewed in their 2020 review of their transit system.
Thank you. Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. When the RDN came and did their presentation on transit here, I was from the understanding that it takes a transit route about 5 to 7 years to establish itself before they review it. Is that still the case, that the RDN, after 7 years of this route has been established, that we will then go through again and review it?
Councillor Westbrook.
No, the message I got is they would pilot it for 3 years, and then they would assess the ridership. And of course, BC Transit, as we heard, pays a significant amount. And if they don't see the ridership increase, it may be to a point where they might not want to support it, and we couldn't do it on our own, so we would lose it. But I haven't heard about 7 years. It was a 3-year deal, and we'll be reviewing it sometime this year to see if we can continue, or whether we have to change it, or some other iteration of an on-demand service. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
It's just 2 seconds, but I do want to highlight in budget 2020-2021 for the provincial budget, BC Transit funding was frozen for the next 3 years. So just as a heads up, that if we're going to scale up new initiatives, there might not be funding from BC Transit for that.
Any further comments on this section? Seeing none. Financial administration. Mr. Marsh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The report in front of you just deals with revenue and expenditures until the end of January this year compared with last year. It's very early in the year. Staff report to council monthly on the financial situation of the town, and everything on that report is within what we would expect in terms of budget expectations versus actual. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that council may have. Thank you.
Any questions from council? Seeing none, a motion to accept for information. Seconder is done. Councillor Walker.
I'm not sure why we're all of a sudden moving to accept things as we're trying to say we do less motions. We've already accepted this as we approve the agenda. There's no staff recommendation to accept this, and we just had a debate or a discussion about how 600 motions a year is too much, and now we're making motions that we don't need to make. So I think we can move on without a motion on this one.
Well, 2 things. That's the way I've decided to do it. That's the way the RDN does it. It's just a motion that we all accepted this for information. There's no work to get done. So all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Fire Department. Daniel?
The report is before council. If there are any questions, I will answer them.
Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. Just a question. I know with this year, when Chief Norris came on, we started doing 2 different practice nights to better accommodate our members. Just an update on how that's going with doing, I believe, Monday and Thursdays. How is the 2 different practice nights going?
I believe it's working well. Having the option of the 2 nights is good. I haven't had any negative feedback around it to date, so I think that's quite a good outcome. I do think there's one element that I should flag, because I spoke with Chief Norris earlier on as this report was drafted, that we did have one resignation of one of our regular duty. And I did want to flag, even though it is in the report, it is a good resignation in that this is one of our young firefighters, after 2 years of experience with us over here, got in with North Vancouver. And I think for a lot of young individuals that are working through the ranks and learning, this volunteer fire department is about creating opportunity, and seeing a success story like that is exciting for some of the recruits that are there as well.
I know we've had a few apply in Calgary, North Van and West Van and Surrey, all over, so it's really good to see. Councillor Harrison.
Just a 2-second point. We had that recent fire in a washroom, which is a bit unfortunate. But I remember seeing someone that took a picture with their cell phone, and the thing they wrote underneath was how impressed they were with our fire department arriving on the scene within 5 minutes, is what they said. So just a little bit of a hat tip to our fire department for mobilizing so quickly and preventing further damage.
Good words, thank you. Councillor Westbrook.
Move receipt of the report.
Thank you. Seconded? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Monthly building permit report. Mr. Sales.
The next two reports on the council agenda are also for information. We have a monthly building report and monthly bylaw report. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you. Seconded. All in favor? Oh, Councillor Walker.
Again, I just can't help but re-articulate the fact that you are scolding this council for making too many motions, and yet we're adding 4 new motions, which we say don't create any work, and yet we have staff who then have to go through all of these motions for quarterly updates to make sure, yes, this motion was done. We've already accepted the agenda, so I don't see, I mean, if you want to move these all at the end, and you can have a block to accept them, but you don't be pointing the fingers at other people because our motion count is high when you are encouraging us to make an extra 10 motions a meeting that are completely unnecessary.
Thank you. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Variance permit 333 Judges Row. Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Weiss. Ms. Gould, if you could pull up my presentation, that would be great. Not quite there yet. Okay. Development variance permit for 333 Judges Row. This is a property on the waterfront. As we've discussed for a few properties recently, they're quite challenged in terms of the depth. And so you'll see that this property, just for background, so minimum setback is 8 meters from the road. And so this blue line would essentially be the closest you could get to Judges Row. And so you'll see that there is actually no buildable area on this property. So what they're proposing is a 5.85 meter setback from Judges Row, which is reasonable given the rather deep boulevard there on the property. They're also proposing a 0.3 meter variance to the side yard setback. The other thing I should note is that there's an existing building on the site. It's a very small residential dwelling, and essentially they're retaining some of that footprint and expanding it. So this is the first time council has received this report. So the recommendation is that it be referred to the next council meeting and that the public be given an opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Councillor Harrison.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Discussion. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have one concern and one question. My concern is that it sounds like the development that's going to take place for this residential unit will be below the flood control level, and that has concerns for future dwelling of that property. Second question I have is through the chair to staff is the statutory notification, because this is just a development variance permit. I guess through the chair to staff is who on this street will be notified and how far out does that go?
Through the chair, let's start with question number 1. So with regard to the flood control level, there is an existing dwelling on the property. So provincial regulations say that you can expand up to 25% within or with the existing flood control level. So yes, it is below what we would permit if it were a new dwelling, but because it is there, it was built according to regulation at the time, it's okay and can be slightly expanded. With regard to the second question, it's a 50-meter notification area.
Further comments? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. 217 Higson.
Thank you, Mayor Wiest. We're still on the waterfront, but at the far end of town. We're here reviewing a development variance permit and a development permit for the construction of a new dwelling at 217 Higson Crescent. So I'd just like to highlight on the map here that the property in question, you'll note on the plans, is actually two lots. So that this property owner owns 217 and 221 Higson Crescent. The development variance permit being discussed today is for 217 Higson Crescent. So essentially they're planning to remove the house that exists at 221 and use that as a large side yard. This is a footprint of the house, which doesn't give you a lot. Looks like a house, right? But let's look at the next slide, because this sort of describes the constraints on the property and the reason that they're here for a development variance permit. So as we noted on the previous application, flood construction levels are much higher than they used to be in the past. And for this particular property, the geotechnical report states that flood construction level has to be 5.5 meters geodetic. So that means in reference to some arbitrary point out in the ocean. It doesn't necessarily mean the height above the land there. So this is a challenge because the existing elevation is, if you have very good eyes, I believe it's 3.43 meters. So in other words, they need to come up with the building over 2 meters higher than what's there now. That means that the house that exists next door could never be built as it is today. So the variance that they're requesting is essentially to build a building that's less than the maximum 9 meters height, but they would like to start it up at the flood construction level, which is currently permitted. So this is certainly worth considering from the perspective of staff, and the recommendation is that notification be sent out and that it be discussed in the next meeting. Also, in conjunction with that, at the next meeting, we'll be discussing the issuance of a development permit, and this would authorize work on the foreshore, assuming that the province also goes along with it. This property owner has been closely following the waterfront master plan work that the town's been doing, and has proposed their own green shore coast protection program, and it's actually it's an ambitious and impressive proposal that they have. It involves offshore headlands to mitigate the wave impact, and then a sloping beachfront. So from the perspective of people walking on the beach, instead of seeing a hard wall that I think is nearly 2 meters high at this location, you would be seeing a gentle sloped beach and small rock outcroppings. So this is definitely the direction that the town has been encouraging people to explore through the waterfront master plan. It's very encouraging that they've taken the step to invest in a design. So once again, we're not looking at the development permit today, but that would be considered in conjunction with the development variance permit next meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Harrison.
So I had a chance to talk to the property owner, and he actually literally hired the lead person for our waterfront master plan study from SNC Lavalin. So yeah, I'll move the staff recommendation.
Seconded. Discussion. Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. I've got a couple concerns about this one, more or less personal concerns. I attended the open house today with the mayor, and the resident there had the exact same concern that I've had, and of course this came to our last council meeting, but we sent it to this one, so I wasn't able to voice those ones there. But this type of building, you know, we've been building these big homes on our waterfront. You would go down Judges Row, and we've been building some pretty big homes that don't really fit in with the neighborhood, and they definitely don't fit in with Qualicum Beach. These big concrete, massive castle houses are not Qualicum Beach. And so that's where my hesitation comes from. And then also just a question through the chair to staff. When we're building a house like this, what is the process for notifying our public? And here it says that we're not required to do it until we reach a certain phase. Before I make my decision to start this process, I'd like to be able to know what the public's thinking, especially the neighbors. So what is the process on that, and what could we do to improve that in the future?
Mr. Sales.
Sure. So the notification area is 50 meters. So any property or owner within 50 meters of this would be notified. So these are large properties, so it would probably go beyond the immediate neighbor to the following neighbor and then across the street. So all the immediate neighbors would be notified.
Councillor Filmer.
And when do we do that?
Prior to the next council meeting, it's a minimum of 10 days in advance of council consideration.
Councillor Walker.
To allay some of the concerns of the previous councillor, what we're moving hopefully today is simply the issuance of the statutory notification, and the actual discussion will be at the next meeting. So I think right now the importance is to make sure that the nearby residents are aware of what's going on, and then we can have a more fulsome discussion as to the merits of the Green Shore and the development itself at the next meeting.
Well said. Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you. Looking at the plans that we just saw and in our package, this doesn't look like a big concrete box. There's a couple of places in town that aren't very attractive and don't really suit the character of the town, but I think this one does. And also the owner's initiative for working with the foreshore and using a page from our book and our waterfront master plan to actually see that happen in reality on private property. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to see how that actually comes to reality and what it costs and how it works. Thank you.
Further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Mr. Weir.
Thank you.
Your long-awaited time is up.
Yes, thank you. So my first request is under my motions. It says be accepted as presented, and I'm advised that we want to change that as amended. It's been polished, apparently by Jean, and recognizing her efforts and value. I just kindly friendly amendment to our staff recommendation here that you accept it as Jean has polished it. Is that okay? Wait,
Absolutely.
if that's all right, then I'll proceed with my report.
Please do.
Okay. Do I not have a presentation? What? It was on the computer from last council meeting. We had it loaded on the computer. It might be in this. Okay. So this is a 2019 updated age-friendly transportation plan. I'll go to the next slide. So it was first presented in 2013, two updates in 2014 and 2016. In 2017, it was combined with the cycling plan and the trail routes based largely on the value of that we were seeing in the Dollymount Trail and the undertaking of the waterfront, or the trail down Memorial to the waterfront. So in 2019, it was updated to reevaluate priorities and consider additional projects. And on the 30th of September last year, it was presented to the public in two sessions at the Civic Center, one in the afternoon, one in the evening. So the purpose of the plan, it builds on previous plans by their projects and recommendations. The intent is to improve mobility, largely from improving facilities and linkages and encouraging active transportation, and improve safety, largely by improving design elements. That would be exampled by the improved geometry at both West Crescent and Village Way. And then to provide guidance to prioritize transportation projects. A myriad of transportation projects are often coming to council accompanied by single-issue lobbying. And with the limited resources, this presents quite a problem to council. So the intent is to evaluate projects and present some guidelines for spending those limited resources. So the evaluation is done with a matrix based on these elements. So the safety considers the relevant improvement a project will bring. The use, will the project enhance use or increase use? Does it address vulnerable users, pedestrians, cyclists, seniors, people with mobility issues? Does it contribute to the improvement of the network? Cost, that's capital and operating, also considers our opportunities to find other sources of funding to build our capital projects. And other would recognize, opportunities might be, we have other utility to work to do along the alignment. There might be adjacent development that would bring contributions to it. Dependency, we may have to do other things first. Regulatory would be, as an example, the difficulties posed by the railway in trying to reconfigure the intersection at First and Memorial. And appeal support opposition is generally just recognizing the input of the public to our project lists. So they end up in this prioritized list. Not intending to look at this, but it just shows that they are ranked as a result of going through that evaluation matrix. At the suggestion of council, we have added the completed projects on the bottom in purple, so we don't lose sight of what we've been able to accomplish in the plan already. Green are new and blue are currently underway. So priorities are multi-use pathways, traffic calming and Village Way at KSS. This is an important project, but it's extremely expensive, and we're probably going to do it in 2 phases. We're starting with the improvements of the crosswalk that are being asked for by School District 69. Parking prohibitions on 19A west of Bay. This is another one that was brought up both in the public forum and by council and by the Select Committee on Public Safety. So the recommendations made by our consultant are that if we have less than 4 meters from the edge of the lane to a hard structure such as a fence or a house, that there be a parking prohibition and it be reserved for pedestrian movement. And our intention would be that once this report is accepted by council, staff would start a communication process to consult the affected residents. Speed display signs, this is a recommendation at Bennett Narrowview School. We have vulnerable users in that corridor. It's right on a ring road. We've made several improvements that are helping already, but this is a low-cost benefit, and we've already consulted with ICBC, and I think we're going to get 100% funding for this one. Flashing light crossings on 19A. This came up at all of the public consultations, and it's as part of the reconsideration, redesign of the waterfront. We're certainly seeing some of these incorporated. The first one that we're seeking funding for with ICBC would be at the bottom of Rodway Trail. Rodway Trail is in the budget this year to be completed with a set of stairs. So we're thinking that this is a location where we're directing a lot of pedestrian movements to the waterfront. It's also adjacent to the Shady Rest. So we're thinking this would be a good improvement, and especially good if we get it funded by ICBC. Roundabouts, 19A Village Way Country Club, Village Way Qualicum. Grants are already in for the 19A Village Way one. Village Way Qualicum is still recommended as the best improvement for that intersection, but it's a challenge because currently there's no grant funding or funding available for it, but we still see it as a high priority. It is still a high accident site, actually our highest injury site. Traffic signal Memorial First. As I sort of referred to, we got regulatory considerations there. The requirements of the railway would make this extremely expensive. So I think that we can't recommend going forward on this until we see some reasonable resolution of some of those requirements. Traffic circles, this is proposed to change the stop signs that are on Beach and Primrose due to their high degree of non-compliance. And we're recommending that perhaps traffic circles might be a safer implementation in these neighborhoods. And road closure on Railway and at Memorial. This has been recommended by ICBC since 2001, so we would like to see this one go forward, and there may be a project on that street that would help advance this. So additional issues. Highway 19A west of Bay, so we have developed a series of cross-sections with a consultant to look at both short-term and long-term options for that corridor. There are tremendous encroachments in the right-of-way. If some of those could be removed, we wanted to know what the ultimate cross-sections should be like for a redeveloped waterfront. So we both have interim and long-term solutions. Just as examples, this looks to areas where we have limited cross-section or limited cross-section width, and how we could accommodate that safely with a barrier between a shared bicycle and pedestrian walkway, and then in other areas where we have additional width, where on the other side of the street we might be able to accommodate all uses there, including parking. So additional issues that were brought up, the question was raised whether we should convert school zones to playground zones, and that is not recommended. Playground zone is in effect from dawn to dusk. School zone is default 8 to 5, and maybe early by a change in the signage, and it can be altered with a speed tab. Playground zones typically do not extend beyond the playground site, although the one on First Avenue is a little out of that standard, because they've started it at the lawn bowling site, but that's not really regular. School zones extend to where the children may be walking or crossing the road, and that's commonly well beyond the school property. School zones indicate the likely presence of children on the roadway. Playground zones only alert motorists to a potential hazard. In the case of the playgrounds on First Avenue, if motorists don't regularly see people playing in the school ground, they won't really respond to the sign being there warning them of the potential hazard. 30 kilometers an hour should be posted only on unfenced playgrounds. Otherwise, 50 kilometers is the standard, where on a school zone, the default is 30 kilometers an hour. Motorists are more likely to respond to school zone signs than playground zones, and it's more likely that they will reduce their speed in school zones than in playground or other 30 kilometers zoned areas. And it's more likely the RCMP will persist with enforcement of speed limits in school zones than in like a playground zone or another marked 30K zone. And funding from other agencies such as ICBC are more likely for school zones. So that ends my presentation.
Wow, that was quick. Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Maurice. I would like to make the motion that we accept this as amended, and that we also forward that to the age-friendly, to the Select Committee on Public Safety.
Seconder, thank you. Discussion. Councillor Felber, Councillor Walker.
Thank you. I just have a couple questions. First one was just more or less about crosswalks, and I know in the last package when the plan was in there, which I'm just reviewing right now, it showed the existing and future locations of safe crossings, I believe, either whether it was the flashing ones or just a crosswalk. And my question is, where the Dollymount Trail, I believe it's Dollymount Trail that comes out and it meets Qualicum Road, and then you can carry on to then connect. I was talking with a couple of residents just recently about putting a crosswalk there. So what is the timeline on that one? As I've personally always wanted a crosswalk there. There might be a recommendation on why we don't have one there right now. So I guess just through the chair to staff an update on that one.
I'm happy to report that that is currently under construction. The first phase of that is the lighting of that intersection, and because it's a very dark zone, so there's a pole there now. It hasn't had the hydro drop to it to power it up, but we're also going to use that pole to feed a flashing crossing warning sign at that area. So to the north of where the trail exits, the trail exits Fern Road, we will fill in the ditch there and make the crosswalk on that side going over to where the light is now. We met with ICBC last week, and they have not got back to us with the percentage of funding they will support for that, but we definitely think we are getting funding, so that will be done this year, shortly.
How's that for service? Councillor Felber.
Thank you. And just an update. So then now we keep carrying on. Now you're coming up to Bennett Road. And there is the crosswalk, but it's farther down from where the trail comes out to enter Chartwell. Is there a reason why I'm sure there is, but why the crosswalk isn't right at the trailhead? Instead, you have to walk further down there.
So the flashing crossing is really, has been located and was supported by ICBC at Cardinal, because that is where we have the most vulnerable users, and the children crossing from the sidewalk that is on the west side to the separated sidewalks on the back of the ditch on the east side. So they thought that that was the most appropriate location. They don't really favor two flashing crossings so close together. And the point that the people crossing at Fern Road are adults and are better able to select a safe crossing moment and just make the crossing. We don't, I think I'm a broken record on not marking crossings if they're not really warranted, because people have a false sense of security that they can just step out, they have the right of way, and they're going to get hit by a car. So currently, ICBC and RCMP are not recommending the marking of a crossing or an additional flasher there. We have made an application to ICBC, but it has not been supported.
Councillor Walker.
I think the report that we're accepting says that it will be the future location of an illuminated crossing or a flashing crossing, but maybe that's way in the future. I'm hoping that Ms. Smith caught Broadway Trail. Is that one of the typos that was caught? It was mentioned on page 9 of the page 12 of the report. It says Broadway Trail instead of Broadway Trail. So hopefully that was caught. On page 7 of this report, it mentions the parking enforcement where the zone is less than 4 meters. I guess through the chair to staff, that you made a comment that we were going to start the communication process on that immediately. Does that require a motion, and or what kind of timeline are we looking at for that to be enforced?
So I think my intention was that it would go to the Select Committee on Public Safety for comment, come back to Council, and at what point that it is adopted by Council, that's when we would start a process with the residents. I didn't think we were going to start it right now. We'd sort of wait for that committee to make comments back to Council to like adopt it in that format, and then we would engage the public. And that there is going to be a flashing crossing on Qualicum Road at Fern Road.
Councillor Walker. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that process, when it goes to the select committee, I mean, that won't be too long, but I want to make sure this is done before summer if we can. I mean, that's a very active corridor for pedestrians, and so to have less cars in those narrow strips would be beneficial, I think. The other question I had was on page 9 of this report, which is not in the package. It relates to a new neighborhood bikeway plan for Primrose Street. Maybe I missed this part of the report, but if staff, through the chair to staff, if I could get an update on what that neighborhood bikeway looks like.
It looks awfully like Primrose right now. It's just selecting that as a route as opposed to Memorial, and thinking that it's trying to attract people to use that on cycles rather than Memorial as a safer transit up to Rupert.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If that is to be destined a bikeway, I know this will create traffic in opposite flows. It's better for cyclists as if there are no stop signs there. Well, maybe not no stop signs, but as you're coming down the hill, if you keep hitting all those stop signs, you lose a lot of the momentum, and so you're really being encouraged to cycle in on Jones as opposed to down that street. As you cross Garden there, you definitely don't want to just sort of accept that people will follow through on that stop sign, but just a comment that if we can encourage that type of throughfare for cyclists, that would be great.
Mr. Weir.
I think our intention of removing some of the stop signs on Primrose and Beach is to experiment with the little central islands and see if that's a safer alternative, and that would better accommodate the cycling route. And they could be implemented then on all streets.
I think it's very sage advice, Councillor Walker, about not chancing going through any stop signs around here. So, any further comments? Councillor Harrison.
So I just wanted to highlight firstly, I thought it was really interesting to see, with a small community and not always being front and center in the news cycle, the number of projects we've actually got completed. It was really good to see. And the second thing I do want to highlight with the provincial government, one thing where I think they're really moving in the right direction is with active transportation and trying to prioritize cycling and pedestrian use. And I did notice that a lot of the trail connectivity was actually highly ranked because you can get relatively low costs for some of those projects and actually have significant benefit to the community as a whole. And keeping people on their feet or on a bike is going to have significant impacts on healthcare as well in our region. And it'll keep people healthier. So yeah, thank you very much for the good work. And the last thing is, when I think of it, I really like the paint for the school zone near Airview. The number of people who sort of, you can almost see them like, oh, brake, because they actually see it. It's really good to see. There's some really interesting low-cost ways to ensure compliance. So thanks.
I guess just one more thing, Mr. Weir. I think it came up again this morning at the open house that Robert and I were at. It was stop lines and stuff. Of course, we get to repaint every year. Certain portions we get done every year. When does that start? Typically.
Well, we've started to remove the non-standard stop lines and reevaluate where it's really appropriate to have them. So if we're going to put in a stop bar, it's going to be to an MOTI regulation. We were not following that all over town with our stop words and little tiny stop lines. So in the interest of trying to reduce the amount of repetitive work that's not necessary, we're removing those, and they will be installed where we consider them to be appropriate, and that's typically at points of major conflict with higher speed highway. So you're going to see them on roads entering 19A as opposed to everywhere in the downtown.
Very good, thank you. Any further conversation? Councillor Filmer.
Well, as everyone knows, I really like line painting, especially when we come up to our parking lots, but we'll save that discussion for the spring, Mr. Weir.
Further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor on 1 and 2? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Luke.
Thank you, Mayor Weiss. The next item on the agenda is a zoning amendment for 595 Spruce Street. The owner of 595 Spruce has made an application to amend the zoning for the subject property to permit 2 single-family dwellings. The proposal is to subdivide the property into 2 parcels with 1 single-family dwelling for each property. Each of those parcels would be approximately 582 square meters. So here's the context of this property. We're looking at Spruce and Mill. It's the second property in. This proposal did go to a public information meeting on February 18th, 2020. I'd just like to highlight some of the concerns that were brought up at that meeting. Some of the key areas of concern included removal of the trees on the subject property and also the laneway, which would be developed for access to the rear of the property. Drainage on the property. Apparently there's some drainage corridors that would need to be reestablished to maintain drainage going this way and out to Spruce. Concerns that the development proposal is low density, and there were some concerns about the development not being affordable for families. So after consideration of some of those comments, also the comments at the most recent public hearing, there's a staff recommendation which is new before you today, and that is in response to the concern over tree removals on this property. So if council does want to see this advance, but does wish to address the concerns expressed by some of the residents over tree removal, this second recommendation is that prior to adoption of the zoning amendment bylaw, the 595 Spruce Street applicant pay a $5,000 landscaping charge to cover the cost of replacing all trees removed from the subject property in a different location. The intent here would be that to identify a suitable piece of town land, likely, that could receive substantial planting of trees. Could be private property as well, but the intent is to account for the tree loss on this property somewhere else in the town. So the recommendation is that this be advanced. So the location is one that the town has identified for increased density. So it's a modest increase in density, but it is in line with the town's official community plan. So the recommendation is third reading. The second recommendation is regarding that $5,000 landscaping charge. Thank you.
Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Mayor. I move both A and B as far as the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison, second. Discussion. Councillor Walker.
If we could separate those two motions, that would be great. And speaking to the first motion, I had spoken in favor of this previously, but upon further reflection on this property, I mean, we cannot limit development as a result of trees. It's not a power we have. But the fact that and that's a community charter framework, but the fact that there's been absolutely no consideration for the trees at all in these designs does worry me. I mean, if we're going to see development in this community, you look at some of the other communities that have old growth trees in the middle of development, and it creates a really special environment. You've got a neighborhood that has established older trees that really defines the character of that area. And to move on one of these lots, to move one of the dwelling units back a little bit to preserve a couple of the larger specimens, obviously not all of them, but a couple of the larger trees on the front of the property would be good to keep. And if we're going to either keep the laneway or a couple of trees, I'd like to see that as a part of this proposal. The applicant has sent a letter in saying that they wouldn't need the laneway access if they had driveways off the front. And I think if we can find some sort of, and I don't like the word compromise, but some consolidation for or consideration for the neighborhood, whether it's through the preservation of a couple of the larger specimens on the front of the property or the laneway, I think would be appropriate. And I would hope that council will defer this to have that discussion.
Councillor Felber.
Thank you. I don't want to waste a whole lot of time on this, but I'm coming from the same area that Councillor Walker was coming from. We heard from our residents and we heard from the direct neighbors. And when I say direct neighbors, the people that live on all 2, 3, 4 sides of the property, that they'd like to see these trees, or at least some of the trees, saved. And we sat here for an hour and a half and we also listened to that. I've got no problem with the actual development itself. It's the way we're going about it. So at that point, I cannot support this either.
Councillor Harrison.
So first, I just point out our quality of life survey done in 2017, and there's a specific question about where do you want to see development. And 69% of citizens in that survey said they wanted to see more development in walking distance to the village center. And I'm quoting here directly from the quality of life survey. So that had, I believe, almost 2,000 respondents in total. So there is a pretty clear direction that that's where people want to see more density in terms of the buildings. I do like the staff recommendation here to try to have a one-for-one replanting. That does make sense. It does make sense to look at planting trees in areas where you don't have the same density. If we're going to be talking on the one hand that we want to see more density on the property, but on the other hand we want to retain all the trees, those two are mutually contradictory a priori. You can't do both. As far as retaining trees as well that are older, I'd be very cautious about the interlocking root systems of older trees. When you remove all the trees around an old tree, you can actually, with heavy rainfall and winds, make that tree more vulnerable to actually fall down on a house. So you do want to be very careful about that. I think what's being proposed here is pretty reasonable. We do have in our OCP very clear language that they're moving towards laneway access. This loops into then building sidewalks that'll go all the way down the street, ensure that people can be actually more active and engaged in the community, and it's moving less in the direction of having because if you actually look at the street, right now basically every driveway is accessed from the street. It's all street access for the whole street. If we don't want to have laneway access, then we should remove that from our OCP as a guiding principle for the village center. That's fine, we can do that. But just so long as it's there, and that's something that was passed by the previous council unanimously, I believe, for the OCP, I do think it's something that we should pay attention to. Without the compromise for B, I think it's a much harder sell. I think it's fair to say that. We'd be leveling all the trees and putting 3 back. But by putting essentially then, I think it'll be about 46 trees somewhere else, which could also be indigenous to the climate and looking forward to what the climate's going to change to. It could actually ensure that we have trees for 50 or 100 years as opposed to 10 or 15. So I do think that both A and B are reasonable.
I think what we're trying to do in the long term through this process, the trees are an issue. Like, trees are an issue everywhere. And of course, we've managed to take down some of the people were quite upset about, which was part of the age-friendly transportation plan, actually. I'm not going to go down that road. But at the end of the day, we need to maintain the net canopy, and that's the goal, I believe, in our tree and vegetation law, bylaw that's coming, is to maintain that tree canopy. We get so many trees in 50 years, we're going to have that many or more, not less. I think that's part of the deal. cedars, my mom's place in Qualicum Woods, when they got that big, were absolutely horrible. So it's easy for us to say that you should keep the cedars when you're the one who are going to have the impacts of these cedar trees and what they can do to your yard and your roof. Where are we on the front drive garages? I know they made the offer during the meeting, and I like that offer. Is this something that we could address before, if we did third reading today, could we address that before adoption?
So the developer has offered to relocate the garages to the front. So that is a direction that council could go. As it stands right now, it's the previous proposal. So unless otherwise directed, council would be advancing the version with driveway access to the rear of the property. The one thing I would note is that we should distinguish between the trees on the private property and the trees on the laneway, because ultimately that laneway is intended to function as a laneway. So if it's not this property owner, it's going to be some property owner at some point that needs to use it for access, and the town would be hard pressed to say that it could never be used for vehicles forever. So at some point, for better or worse, those trees in the laneway will need to be removed.
Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. Just to follow up to the comments that were just given at this table, Councillor Harrison, as someone that likes to hold me to what I say, I did not say we need to remove all the trees. I said, let's try to save some of the trees. And you said, as we shouldn't be saving all the, or you're going to get rid of all the trees and we need to save all the trees. That's not what I said. That's not what Councillor Walker said. So we'll just clarify that point there. On that point, you know, I believe the names of those roads are Spruce Street and Pine Street and Maple Street and all the way through there. And you know, again, and plus we don't have our tree and vegetation management plan, so I guess if we just remove as many trees before the plan comes forward, then we don't really need the plan. So I guess it's, you know, a two-way street there. But I don't categorize myself as a big environmentalist. I'm not. I commute to work every day and I'm a big gas burner, so I can't quote myself as that. But trees are extremely important, and after hearing from the public and many months of all this coming forward to us, they are important and extremely important to our residents. And that's our job here, is to protect what's important to our residents. And that's all that I'm trying to do here. So at that point, I cannot support this, and I will ask for a recorded vote, please.
Councillor Harrison.
I was actually referring to the report from staff, which stated that the trees on the property will be removed and then 3 will be planted. So I don't know what you said previously that you want to refer to, but I'm actually referring to the report in our agenda. Secondly, too, I do have one issue, though, with what's on the table here, and that's we added at the last meeting a very interesting covenant, which we've got a legal opinion on isn't really enforceable in any way and might actually cause complications later on. So I'm just wondering, is this that the instructors, staff be instructed to review options for resting covenants to notify any future owners? Is that something that would be on the property, or is that just a report for staff to do?
Mr. Sales.
Through the chair, that was reported at the last meeting, so we were advised by our lawyer that that wouldn't be advisable to try to advance a covenant to that nature, so that is not in place.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that as well. But the being that the laneway at some point will be cleared, but the trees, and I mean, if these were not old growth cedar trees, I mean, I'm assuming everybody's walked by this property. I remember knocking on this door, chatting with the owner and going, at some point this house is going to come down and all of this is going to come down too, and it's a huge loss for the area. And it's a loss that's not hard to circumvent. We're not saying, you know, the trees in the back that have been topped, those are liabilities. Those I mean, they do contribute to the beauty of the area, but the ones that's the biggest concern are the old growth cedars in the front of this property. And I really think it's useful for us as a council to take that into consideration. If you look at the way the plan is on page 111, you've got a bunch of large trees all along the east side of this property that are outside of the development area or in between the two properties. and consideration can be made to preserve those trees while still developing this lot. I think there will have to be some reorientation of the structures, and they will lose the functional value of their front yard as people expect it, which is, you know, a concrete path and a little boxwood hedge, but the neighborhood benefits substantially. So yeah, I guess I move that we lay this motion on the table and consider a deferral for a revised plan to take into consideration some of the larger old growth trees on site. Mr. Mayor? Perhaps if some members of council are going to vote against motions, it would be relevant for the rest of council to understand why, so that we can actually have an honest debate in public about what it is that's important to those members of council, and perhaps try to work to get away from this 3-2 split and try to find a compromise where we can actually represent our community.
Quite actually, I think.
Sorry, just as a point of order, can the Councillor Walker's point specifically to the point of the debate that was not honest?
By honest, I mean frank,
Honestly, you guys,
frank debate.
Bring it back. I've spoken to it. Councillor Harris has spoken to it. I'm not sure if Councillor Westbrook has. And he doesn't have to. I've been feeling this way since day one. My guideline is I don't have any right to tell John Wood he can't take down a tree on his lot. It's not my right. But I can ask him through a bylaw, say we will plant somewhere else or plant a different tree on his lot. It's not my right to tell him what to do on his property. And you cannot talk me into that. It will never happen. So that's the way I've always been this way. That's the way I feel. I'm sorry. That's the way it is. Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you. Just so everybody knows where I come from, I agree entirely with what Councillor Harrison said about the OCP review, about people saying we don't want urban sprawl, we want densification in our village neighborhood, this is part of that. Closer density, people walking distance, all that kind of good stuff. We had a similar situation with the previous council on Maple Street, where there was one house on a size a lot like that, I think. And now there are 2 homes, nice homes. They fit right in with the neighborhood. You walk by there, you drive by there, you would never know that was an issue. But it was. It was, again, a 2-3 vote. You drive by it and you go, well, what's wrong with this? A couple of years from now, people will drive by there and go, what's wrong? What was the issue here? So if you want to know where I come from, that's what my motivation is. I agree that we shouldn't enhance urban sprawl when we don't need to. But I think if we want densification and walking distance, which is good for the environment, people can walk, ride or bike, that's the way to go. So I support this. And I agree with our mayor saying, I don't think we have a right to tell people to cut down trees on their private property. Thank you.
Councillor Walker, and then I'm going to call a question on 6-1A.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So relating to the density on the site, there's no part of the motion that I had previously made that would restrict the density, and that's not the goal. The goal is to still have, I would actually like to see more density on the site, to be honest. I think it's a lot easier to justify the removal of trees on the laneway and on this property if we have more dwelling units on here. That creates an increased tax base where we can then have boulevard trees and do what the community expects there. But right now we're talking about 2 dwelling units on a site, and if you look at the page that I referenced, they fit on the site with some of these trees. And for us as a council to say, it's not up to us to say whether you can or can't cut down trees. What my previous motion was, and I'm not debating that motion, but what I would like to see is a further discussion with the developer. Is it possible to preserve some of these trees, yes or no? It's not, we won't proceed. It's, why don't we have a conversation? We had a lot of people at the public hearing very upset with the way that we are proceeding with this application. And they just want to see, can we do better? It's not our job to represent one property owner at the expense of the entire rest of the community. It's our job to represent the community. And if it takes one more meeting to have a little bit more discussion with the developer to get something that is a compromise that makes everybody a little bit happier, I think that is our job.
I agree. And I think that's something that conversation, the developer has been pretty forthright at this point in time about things he may or may not be willing to do, which we can discuss prior to adoption. So I call the question. All those in favor on 6.1A? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. 6.1B. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor Weiss. Through the chair to staff, how was it that the $5,000 came up, and will we be doing this with all future development applications?
So that $5,000 wasn't based on a bylaw or policy. So it's likely that will change when we do get the tree and vegetation management policy. So that was something, that particular figure just came from staff. We know that there's approximately 40 trees on the site. What would it take to replant those in another location? So that's just an estimate. I think that when we actually get the tree and vegetation management bylaw, based on examples in other municipalities, that number is typically higher per tree.
I think we also did this at Timber Lane, did we not? Have a $5,000 bush and shrub and landscaping piece. Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. I was coming from the same area of where did this number come from, but if it's going to cost us $5,000 or cost the applicant $5,000 to replant for the certain number of trees that we're removing, I think it would be better to, what's the cost per tree that we're removing, and then base the number of what they're going to pay off of that. Then that's just personally how I would do it. There's some really old, really nice trees there that might have a very high ticket price. And I don't know if this number is being fair to the trees that will be removed on the property.
Councillor Walker.
I find it interesting that in the previous motion, we're discussing, well, the rules say we don't have to protect trees, and if it's not written in a bylaw, we don't have to enforce it. And here we are, on a whim, coming up with a $5,000 value for trees that we're not applying to other development applications. It's not based in any policy or bylaw that we have, and we're just going to this developer and saying, if you want to proceed, it's another $5,000. I think it's kind of offensive for the trees that are being removed. I won't vote against $5,000, but just in principle, the way that we're going through this, where we'll go through with the development because these are the rules, and yet we're sort of on a whim creating our own rules for the replanting to try to appease some people, I think is disingenuous. And I don't think that this $5,000 will truly replace the trees that are being removed on the front of this property.
Again, this is the second time that I know of that we've done it. But and again, with the new bylaw coming in place, I'm hoping that we address that in a more formal matter. This is a stopgap to make sure we do start the net canopy change, is what I spoke about earlier. So call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. 191 4th Avenue. Luke.
Thank you, Mayor Weiss. Next item is a zoning amendment for 191 4th Avenue West. This is a property at the corner of Beach and 4th. Currently has one single-family dwelling on the property. What they're proposing is to build a duplex. You'd have one property that's accessed via Beach Road, the other which is accessed via the laneway. And you do note that there's a sidewalk here on the property, but at a previous council meeting, council has directed the town to create a sidewalk reserve account and to take funds equivalent to the value of constructing that sidewalk and put it aside for future sidewalk construction projects. So the recommendation at this time is to give third reading. I will note that because the development permit is pending, if council did want to adopt the bylaw this evening, that would also be an option. What would need to be included as a caveat is that the previously stated requirement for the sidewalk contribution would have to be received before the development permit was actually issued. So I believe, Mayor Weiss, you have language to that effect.
I move the recommendation.
Thank you. Seconded. Discussion. Councillor Walker.
It's interesting, this development through the public hearing and the public process, we've had very little feedback on. And I'm looking forward to seeing a little more density in this area. I wish it was more densification for this area of town, but I think this will contribute to the neighborhood.
It's a beautiful building, what they've done, and of course, you can't tell by the picture exactly what's going to be at the end result, but it looks really, really good. I like the landscaping, what they've done. Granted, I think we're looking for more densification downtown, but it's a start. You know, every house goes to a duplex that can handle it. We're doing it fairly well. Councillor Harris.
I also suggest, too, that the process of densification is also dependent on market factors, and that process takes time. And so we're going to be moving from single-family homes to duplexes to greater density still, maybe fourplexes at some point in 10, 15 years. And that'll be just a gradual progression because we're going to run out of land soon in Qualicum Beach. A huge portion of the remaining land is ALR, and you can't really do anything on ALR land. There's very little you can do with that. So as we run out of land, that will necessitate further density in the village center, a priori. So I think this is a very good project. It's very well designed. They've done some other duplexes recently. The one on Timberlane was also very well done. And I did appreciate that the proponents got signatures from neighbors saying that they do support the development too. I think that's good to see.
Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. I also support this one going forward. Again, I guess I just find it funny that when we ask for new developments to come forward, we require them to submit a tree and vegetation management plan, but the town doesn't have theirs, so just a little harp on that one that I'll keep harping on until we have ours adopted. With saying that, more of a comment, it's not a question, but when we do start building duplexes and further densifying, parking does become an issue for me. I know we hit that when we were discussing Pine and increasing those duplexes to a fourplex, and parking was the big issue there. So that's just the one concern of mine when we do start densifying more is parking and the level of vehicles that we're going to have in the area.
Further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Harris.
This is a point of clarity to the chair to staff. This is the same thing with the 219. There is no 219 here. It's just getting feedback.
Yes. Sorry, I nodded. I should have spoken.
Sorry, I wasn't looking at you.
Yes.
Councillor Walker.
I suppose also as a question, there's not an old growth cedar tree, but there's a large cedar tree on the front of this. And just, I guess, for clarity of council's direction, we are only charging the tree fee to the property that received a lot of complaints, and we're not actually going to do this with all properties moving forward.
Luke?
Okay, so I'll go back to this. So if you look at the property, there is a cluster of trees here in the laneway. And so, you know, we're in discussions and we'll continue to discuss ways to possibly retain those because really they only need a driveway size access at this time. You know, as I noted in the previous application, retaining trees in the long term may or may not be feasible in the laneway, but certainly we'll make every attempt to retain the large trees which do exist just to the east of this property. But I don't believe that there are any large trees actually on the subject property.
Councillor Walker.
The comment is strictly to the inconsistencies as we start going through development like this and saying we need another $5,000 for this one, and oh, we had 20 people complain, we need another $5,000 for that. I don't think that's a very I don't think that's good governance. I think we're creating a system where, depending on how the community, we're almost encouraging the community to have negative feedback on projects so that they can penalize developers so we can get extra money to spend elsewhere in town. And I think that's setting up a bad precedent.
Again, I think that'll all be clarified once the tree management plan is done. So hopefully we'll have excuse me. March 23rd. And no more comments, please. Thank you. Railway Street Village Way Affordable Housing Amendment.
Thank you, Mayor Weiss. The next item on the agenda today is a zoning amendment for Railway Street and Village Way. This is the proposed site of an affordable housing development. So this is the result of quite a few discussions here at the council chamber. First of all, to put the feelers out early last year to see what possible partnerships there could be in the community who would like to work with the town to develop affordable housing. That was a request for expressions of interest last summer. Then in December, after council had identified this as a good site for affordable housing, The town then went back out to all the people that had responded and invited them to make a proposal. So the request for proposals went out in December. That ended in January, and subsequently the town identified the Qualicum Parksville Kiwanis Housing Society as the partner on this project moving forward. So that's our partner. We have had ongoing discussions about the next steps for this project, but at council's direction, the first major step that the town has taken is to actually zone this for multifamily development. As council and the public knows, there is no design for this site right now because that still needs more discussion with the community, discussion with Kiwanis, and of course, design work to see what's even feasible on the site. The land itself, it's at the intersection of Village Way, which is an oversized right-of-way, and Railway Street, which is a half-sized right-of-way. So between the two, it creates quite a large parcel of land here. A portion of that is occupied by the community garden here on the west side of the property. There's a row of fruit trees there. And then as you go further to the west, you'd find the old train station. There's also the old locomotive here. So through discussions with Kiwanis, the primary development area is here. It's actually substantially already paved over. So approximately 40% of this area here is already covered in asphalt, probably even more if you count the gravel shoulders in that area. So from many perspectives, this would be essentially a brownfield site. It's already been developed and substantially disturbed in the past. So this area is actually quite suitable for redevelopment. So on February 19th, the town hosted a public information meeting, and there were many comments received from the public. So a lot of discussion about the overall location of the proposed development, the density, removal of the community garden came up quite a number of times, removal of trees on the subject property. There are trees here on the south side, just on the border with the railway. There's also a large cluster here, a smaller strip here, sort of in the wedge between those two roadways. Parking and access to the site came up, the design and village character of the proposed development, so that'll be something that requires a detailed review coming up. The tenant selection process was raised, and the overall public process undertaken by the town. So this bylaw has received first and second reading so far. In the opinion of staff, this overall location is actually excellent for affordable housing. It's immediately adjacent to the downtown, so future residents would have very convenient access to employment as well as services and commercial activities. It's right near transit. Assuming that the community garden stays, which is the intent, they're right next to a community garden, near green space, a short walk to the school. It's an excellent location. So many of the questions that came up, the town does need to look carefully at them through the design process. And through discussions with Kiwanis, there's every intent to look at and address those concerns. Certainly the concern that this is the wrong site overall, well, I think that the town council has already determined that this is a good site for housing. That's why the invitation was sent in the first place, and staff agree with that opinion. So the recommendation is that this be given third reading. Council could adopt it this evening. There's no conditions outstanding. Thank you.
Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. I move third reading.
Thank you. Seconded. Discussion. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm concerned as we go through this process that we're going to repeat the same mistake we've made in the past with our process. East Village was a mess. The bus garage property was a mess, and here we are proceeding with the rezoning of a property that we own, $1 million or $1.5 million worth of a town asset that we're going to dispose of without any real discussion about what it is we're trying to accomplish. I know we're trying to create affordable housing, and I echo the comments that our planner said that this is this is a good site. I mean, is it the best site? Maybe, maybe not. Did we have a discussion about that publicly? No. But I do think it is a good site for affordable housing. But as we asked the community for their feedback on the density, which is what this rezoning process is, we didn't have anything to show them. We didn't have any number of units to show them. We had a public hearing where people were sitting in the hall for an hour and a half, sitting on the stairs, not being able to speak to us, and we consider that good enough. And I think we should, for the community, they deserve to be a part of this process. I look at our strategic plan, and our first step is a housing needs assessment. Then we do a housing task force to identify the long-term solutions, and then we build a project to meet the housing needs assessment. And yes, we need affordable houses, but my concern is that, are we building affordable houses for housing for the residents of Port Alberni and Nanaimo and Parksville and excluding the residents of our community? Or are we really building something that our community can get the maximum value from? So I support the idea of an affordable housing project on this property, but the process that we're undertaking, I think, is flawed.
Councillor Harrison.
So I'm going to completely disagree with everything you just said. Let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the numbers of people in Qualicum Beach who need help. So right now, Kiwanis runs about 35 units or so, I believe, of affordable housing. Millhaven is a co-op. It's age restricted. You have to be 47 years of age or older. That's about another 40 units or so for trailer homes in that ballpark. Now let's look at the census. So this is not population projections into the future, just what we had in May of 2016. In May of 2016, 56.3% of renter households spent over 30% of their pre-tax income on rent. Approximately 25% spent over 50% of their income on rent. There are 595 rental households. 1/5 of that is almost 150 households spending over half their money on rent. 150, period, in the census. Now, 56.3%, the BC average is 43.3%. We're fully 13% worse than the BC average. Greater Vancouver area is 43.5% by context. So we are by far the worst in all of Oceanside for that percentage. Secondly, what are the income levels here? Income levels, you're looking at median incomes for single parents of $44,000 per annum. That's also in the census. What can you find for a 2-bedroom for $1,100? Where can you find that anywhere in Oceanside? It doesn't exist anymore. The increase in real estate prices in the last 6 years has been about 65%. Also, too, from the date of the census, it bears remembering that from January 1st, 2016 to roughly July 2018, there was a 15% per annum increase in real estate values. That comes to about 42% when you do the compound interest. So this is about 5 months in to a 2.5-year, 15% per annum price spike, right? When prices go up by 10%, you see a correlative increase in issues like homelessness and people slipping through the cracks. It just happens everywhere you go. So in terms of, now let's look at low-income seniors. That's another population demographic that we need to help out. Okay, so that's 8.5% are low-income median after tax in our census. It's half our population in Qualicum Beach, which is 8,943. So let's assume that you have a roughly similar rate of home ownership where you own your home free and clear. In the census, that's 66% of homes in Qualicum Beach are owned free and clear. So let's bump that up to about 75, 80%. That's probably reasonable because some folks who are a little bit below the income level, if you're a senior, you own your home free and clear, our average household expense is about $500 a month, $500, $600 a month, right? So it's pretty low price. But if you're a widow or widower, which is about almost 1,000 people in Qualicum Beach, and you lost your equity with a divorce and a couple lawsuits, suddenly you're surviving on very low income if you didn't have a long career beforehand. So let's take of that population, let's say maybe 3/4 of that 8.5% are actually fine. Let's say that about 1/4 actually need some help. You've got about 80 low-income seniors in Qualicum Beach who would be homeowners, who would have a hard time getting by. To put this in perspective too, during the election campaign, I went door to door, talked to people, and every door I would say the same thing. Hi, my name is Scott Harrison. I'm running for council. What do you want to see council do over the next 4 years? I didn't give them a rack card. I didn't show them a poster. Just what do you want to see council do? Open-ended question. Pretty much everyone said the same things. We want to see change in who's on council. We want to see avoid a strip development, avoid urban sprawl, and it's really hard for my grandkids to find anywhere to live. So there's a huge unmet demand. Just for the 30% renters and the low-income seniors, if we wanted to have 15 units per floor, and accommodate everyone in Qualicum Beach in the census, it would have to be about 26 stories tall. So obviously, we're not going to do that. It's not even a question. Beyond that, too, what is the program we're looking to apply for? It's called the Community Housing Fund, is the grant program through BC Housing. So what that gets is it's actually mixed income housing. 30% of the units are one bedroom with 70K pre-tax income. And they don't do subsequent checks. You move in, you have under 70K, you're fine. 2 bedrooms, 105 pre-tax income. They don't do subsequent checks. 20% of units have monthly rents of $350 for one bedroom. That's low-income seniors, people on long-term disability. 50% is what's called rent geared to income. Ironically, Parksville is going to help us out with that. Parksville is building a ton of market rental. That's going to update the CMHC data. And so you're actually going to have modern prices built into the CMHC data for our region, for how much does it cost to rent around here. And that's going to go into the BC Housing data. It's Appendix G in the Community Housing Fund. The unmet need here is massive. We have 1 in 4 kids growing up in low-income households, 1 in 5 people between 35 and 45. It's huge. So this is about looking after our own. As far as not being able to find enough people, that's absolutely laughable. We could do 4 more projects of 50 or 60 units and still not meet the unmet need in Qualicum Beach, as per the census, period. So I think 1 development is reasonable. That's what we have in our strategic plan that we all agreed on, and it's a tremendous amount of unmet need. And we have not, as a region or as a community, been building fast enough in the last 3 or 4 years. Some projects have gone through in Parksville. I'm not aware of any in the RDN. Bowser is having some issues. Their senior development might go through, might not. But certainly in Coombs, Arlington, I'm not aware of anything. We haven't done anything except expand Kiwanis by about 7 units in 2015. But before that, the last project was Kiwanis itself. I think that was 2002 when it was initially built. So there's a huge unmet need in Qualicum Beach. This is mostly about looking out for ourselves and trying to get some workers to be able to stay in town. This grant program actually works for that. The data is solid. It's been shared with staff already. I think that it's quite clear. If anyone is confused about how to get this access to census data, send me an email. I'll forward you all the information that's there. It's clear as day.
Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. I struggle to remember my own age sometimes, so I'm impressed that you can do what you do. Was saying that I am in favor of this project going forward. We all campaigned on affordable housing, and we're working towards that. Personally, I'd like to see it higher density than what's being proposed right now. My issue with this is not the proponent we've chosen to do this or what we're building. It's the zoning that we've put on that property. Everyone here at this table is saying that we want to save the community park or the garden there. And we had the opportunity to change the zoning to protect the community garden, but instead we did at this table do that, and then we backtracked and then put it back to what it was. But everyone here at this table is saying, I want to save it, but we wanted to zone it so we could build on it if we needed to, but we all want to save it. And that's the issue I have with the process that we're doing right now, is the developer saying, well, we might not need it, but we might. And at that point, we're going to relocate a really heavy train and a garden that means a ton to this community. So that's where my hesitation comes from on this process. I won't be supporting the zoning of this process. That's not saying that I'm not supporting affordable housing in the town. It's just the process. I want some security on that community park, as well as every resident that came and spoke to us at the public hearing wanted some security on that community park. And though we're saying that it's included in the zoning and included in the development area if they need it. But we all want to save it, and I really struggle with that. We can say one thing but do another. Politicians are great at doing that. It's what we do best. But at the end of the day, if we're going to give some security, let's take it out of the zoning. And I'm going to ask for a recorded vote on this, please.
Actually, I think I've gone on record now a few times about I'll vote to keep the community garden at all costs. We'll just move it around. It doesn't have to be square and take up the whole space. It can actually go around the building in a smaller, different configuration and maintain the community garden. Doesn't mean it has to be a square piece of dirt. It is dirt, which we can move a little bit. So, Councillor Walker.
I think we heard thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we heard quite clearly at the public hearing, that the users of that community garden don't want it moved. These are their plots of dirt. They've maintained these for years. It's a square for a reason. We have deer around here, and if you put a community garden willy-nilly all over a property, you can plant whatever you want and the deer are going to just love it. So I think there's a reason why it's there, and the fact that this conversation is going this direction makes me think that is not a priority for this council, that the commitments made that would be protected are not actually commitments. If we're talking about moving that around, then what's to say it's even going to be at that same site? So I'm hearing two stories from multiple members of this council as to whether that's a priority or not, and that concerns me.
Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. Every development is only allowed to cover the property by a certain percentage. You can't fill the whole site with buildings. So we have to have green space. We got the green space. That's the community gardens. We don't have to landscape, we don't have to do anything. It's there, leave it alone. We can actually add more. If you walk the site, there's room for more community garden plots. So if in future some of the people who live in that affordable housing unit or one of the housing units want to have a community garden, we can add to that. So I'm in no way worried that we're going to lose the community garden as they are. That's our open space, that's part of the project, and that stays. Same with the train. We have no intentions of getting a train or getting a crane to move the train. It's not going to happen. That's part of the open space. So I am very comfortable that those community gardens, plots that are there now, will stay and that potentially could be added to. And it's because of the logic that we ask every developer is to leave a certain percentage of their property undeveloped. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Walker, and then I'll call the question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So site coverage is something that's very easy for council to override. That's not something that's hard-coded. Density is. And if the concern is to have this lot as large as possible so that we can have the density that we want on that site, it is not hard for us through the same process to do an OCP amendment and a rezoning to exclude the community garden, as we discussed before, and have increased density. So the idea that because we have certain minimum site coverage, certain maximum site coverage, that will protect the community garden, that is not true at all. Council can very easily vary the site coverage requirements for a property without, a density we can't change, that we can change. So what concerns me is that we've got two members of council who are very open to the idea of it, and these are the two members of council working with Kiwanis closely and the project manager closely, and I just would hate to see that community garden get lost in the shuffle.
Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Mayor. And I know I'm going beyond the one more call that you're going to call the question, but I think it's pretty clear to staff and to Kiwanis that we're not going to make an amendment, as you said, onto the OCP to allow that lot coverage to change. That's my commitment. Obviously, that's your commitment, and Councillor Filmer also agrees, and I think all of us agree that we want to protect those community gardens. So it's a non-starter for the planner to present us with an option to change that. Thank you.
One more time, Councillor Walker, then I'll call the question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the chair to staff, there are likely other measures that we can do as a council to protect that community garden. Would it make sense to, without excluding it from the zoning, I mean, I don't want to gazette it as a park, but are there covenants in place, or are there things in place that we can do, or even just conditions on development that we can pass that will protect that area?
Certainly there are other tools available to council, but I think it's important to remember that the town is the landowner. The town has absolute control over what gets built, so I see no reason to put a covenant on the property to restrict the town when it's you that's doing it in the first place. So, I mean, just to kind of briefly summarize it, so you have no obligation to issue a development permit that's contrary to your will. So if it gets to the point where you have a proposal in front of you and you don't like what you see, you don't approve the development permit. It's very clear. There's no conditions that you need to put in place at this time, because you will retain all the ability to make the appropriate decision at the time. even if you put a covenant on now, it would be worthless because you also have the ability to discharge the covenant if you change your mind. So I'd say if council thinks this is the right place for affordable housing, get the zoning done and then start talking about the substantive issues like what it looks like. Thank you.
Thank you. Call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
I would like
Councillor
to,
Westbrook.
move that we also make the motion to adopt. This is just for the zoning, and that will allow us then to actually have a conversation with the residents to start planning the actual project. And because I know at this point, without adoption, we haven't really got that opportunity to communicate with people. And I think if we adopt it tonight, we can do that. Thank you.
Seconded. Councillor Filmer.
Well, I'm not going to support adoption either, but I guess if we want to put the cart before the horse and ram things through, let's do it.
That's pretty funny. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure what the point of doing the adoption is so we can talk to the residents when we've ignored them up until this point.
I've got to respond to that. I've got to respond to that. Right now, we cannot talk to you or listen to you about what kind of project we would agree with. But once we adopt it, we can. So, Councillor Walker, if you want to hear what kind of projects we would actually look at, we can do it after we adopt the zoning. Thank you.
Councillor Harrison.
Sorry, I'd also just point out too, one of the reasons to do this is on September 4th of 2018, Gord Johns organized a town hall with Malcolm McNaughton, a whole bunch of other people in the affordable housing sector too. And one of the things that Malcolm McNaughton, he's the guy who signs the checks for BC Housing, so he's basically the top dog. He said specifically, get the zoning done first, just get it done. The last thing they want to do is start dealing with town halls where a handful of people are organized and start protesting everything, and then they renege on a potential grant application. That has happened in other communities as well. He also spoke quite passionately about how one community, didn't specify which one, but it was a community on Vancouver Island who had received a grant from BC Housing to build affordable housing. And then the council, when they were halfway through the project, started saying, well, actually, we want to see a couple more commercial units, and let's move a few condos over here, and let's change this and change that. And it ended up costing BC Housing $150,000 in soft costs, which they couldn't get back. And his exact words were, and those are $150,000 of units that don't get built somewhere else. So I do think that getting the zoning done first, then we can look at the design process as a separate process, is actually what BC Housing is looking for. And if we're going to them asking for several $1 million, it makes sense to actually line up with what they want.
Councillor Walker, Councillor Filmer, then I'll call the question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So basically what we're saying is we want to commit the town to something, and we want to make sure the residents don't have an opportunity to sway our minds. And that to me is a very concerning logic as to why we should expedite a process.
Councillor Filmer.
I think it's important to note that we're not talking against affordable housing. We're talking against the process that we've taken to get to this stage and the zoning that we're putting on the piece of property. I am not at any point speaking against the actual project or what we're going to be doing on that piece of land. However, has the process possibly been flawed? Maybe. Have we maybe gone too quick and not discussed with the people that hire us? Maybe. But at the end of the day, we have the power to do whatever we want as long as it's within legal implications, and that's exactly what we're doing. But have we done it the proper way? Maybe not, and that's why I can't support it.
Thank you. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
And sorry, if the vote could be recorded, please.
John.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's a financial plan report and bylaw before you. The plan and bylaw are for the 2020 to 2024 financial plan. At the last council meeting, council passed 4 resolutions. 2 of the resolutions dealt with staffing levels. The 3rd resolution dealt with a 1% taxation increase, and the 4th one was just giving 3rd reading to the document. The 2 staffing level issues have been addressed in a summarized way within the report, and I think they speak for themselves. In terms of the 1% taxation increase, the bylaw, which is worded in a very general manner, the bylaw states that that particular 1% additional taxation is for new strategic plan council initiatives. And I'd be happy to, we're looking for adoption, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions that you have.
Councillor Walker.
I'll move.
Seconded, Councillor Harrison. Discussion. Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Comments from the gallery. Oh. Deborah, you're next.
Kim Burden here on behalf of the Perfect Storm Group. We would like to thank you for moving our initiative with regard to promoting healthcare in this community forward, and we look forward to coming back with the results. Thanks.
We need a motion to go beyond the 3 hours that we normally allocate for the council meeting. I move that we go beyond the 3 hours.
Seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Thank you.
My name is Deborah McKinley, and I live at 346 Nenzo. Mayor Weiss, you are definitely a firebrand today. Those comments about the environment got my heart going. They were wonderful. And they're also in line with many of the initiatives that the town is working on. Banning of plastic bags and smoking bylaws, the Perfect Storm Group, age-friendly transportation plans, that flow recorder of Beach Creek, the rain garden. Phenomenal. But they're great initiatives for the environment. But I have to query, why in God's name is the town cutting down so many trees all over? It's a disgrace. Obviously, you haven't read a book entitled The Hidden Life of Trees. And let me tell you, even the chiefs of the First Nations will tell you the importance of a cedar. You cannot just dismiss it as well. If you happen to divide 48 into $5,000, you would get probably $104 per tree. You cannot replace trees for $104. That is a sacrilege. Please consider what you're doing. And my last point, you can see we are all relatively seniors. I really resent saying, Mr. Sailland, that we will be confused by the information you put forth. And Mr. Harrison, not everyone is demented in this town, as you referred to us. Thank you.
Lance Nader, 996 Royal Dornoch Drive. The slide is gone, but what I thought you were voting on with respect to Railway Street was to change the zoning for higher density. The map that Luke put up included the community garden. Councillor Westbrook swore up and down, we're not going to touch that, we're going to preserve that, we want to keep that. Then why are you approving an area that includes a community garden for higher density? Why couldn't you simply say, change it to reflect what you're saying? But that didn't happen. And here we are today, we're talking about trees. We have no tree and vegetation policy. It's in the works. It's been in the works for a year. We have no guidance from RDN in terms of demand for affordable housing, but Councillor Harrison offers all of the statistics that it would take a 26-story building to satisfy demand. Why can't we see anything in writing? Why can't we get any of these reports? How can you make these decisions with all of this stuff off to the side? And then lastly, I just want to say this $5,000 number to be imposed on a developer.
Sorry, you just can't speak on the public hearing has been closed on that topic, so you can't comment on the Spruce Street.
Okay,
We're still at
so,
third
but I
reading.
can't
Sorry.
talk on the policy of tree replacement? Yes or no?
Just don't speak on the $5,000. It's tied to the Spruce
Okay,
Street.
all I'm questioning is when I saw a dollar value established, my question was, what kind of trees are going to be replaced? Who's responsible for replacing them? Who's responsible for maintaining them until they mature? None of those things have been answered. They weren't even addressed. That's what I have to say. I have to tell you, I think this was one of the worst council meetings that I've been to. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bill?
Bill Adkins, 827 Primrose Street. It is my understanding that now that the railway project has been approved and can't remember the right word, adopted, that we can, it is no difficulty now to talk to council members about what is going to take place there. So we are no longer, it is my understanding that we're no longer restricted from talking to council. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Bertrand Girard, 546 Nootka Road. About the big tree saving, I want to bring another argument to this. We all know that often some of those big conifer, when they're left very few together, they become dangerous. The wind could knock them down. So back to this proposal with the community garden, I believe that if some of those conifer are taken down, the developer could bring more deciduous trees, especially some that would not get bigger than about 25 feet when they're mature. So you got sun in the winter because the leaves fall, and then the root doesn't destroy all place around. And I'll give a few examples. You have right in front here, we could see one from here, Katsura. We have Katsura around the city hall. It's beautiful. They get to about 40 feet maximum. I'll name a few more. Japanese snowbell is beautiful. Think of dogwood. That's our formal tree for BC. So yes, I say remove some of those big tall trees, but make sure that we plant deciduous trees that are pretty decorative. Maybe even consider a few fruit trees, a few nut trees. Okay, so I think people need to see sometime that there's benefit in removing some of those big trees, because we all know that this proposal is so close to downtown. If people don't need to drive to services, then we reduce carbon footprint this way, as opposed to say we need to save this big tree. Okay, and just one last word about the community garden. I think it's going to be saved. Do remember, please, that a community garden needs good sun from the east, the south, and the west. So therefore, be careful that you're not going to have a 6-story building on the east side that suddenly the garden is deprived from sun. There's one big fir there that I would say could go even, because many gardeners complain that this one big fir is creating a lot of shade in the garden. Thank you.
Thank you.
Walter Hoogland, 789 Canyon Crescent. First of all, I want to comment that this town is a town that does a lot of stuff together. And we've done work on the beach together. We've built the first Kiwanis together. We've done the golf course together. These were all community initiatives, and we got together and built them. And we did some really good work, because during that process, we listened to each other. And I think what has happened here in the last little while, we have been listening. The Kiwanis is a member of this community. They have a reputation in this community. They want to keep that reputation. They have a small group of people that wants to work with council, wants to work with the community. We want to get it right. And there's only one way to get it right, and it's working together. The first meeting we had for the railway site was actually with one of the chief gardeners there, and we listened to him because we see this as a value to the community. and we want to do as much as we can to keep it. We listen to the trees, the people that were really interested in wanting to preserve the trees. And you know what? We want to preserve those trees because they're really important to us. But there's a need out there. We have children, we have grandparents. I'm a grandparent myself, but I know my mother needed a place. I know there's other ladies and seniors that need a place to live. So we got to listen to those people, and they are crying for housing. We have an opportunity with the federal government, the provincial government, our town, our community organizations. All we have to do is listen to each other, and we're going to get it done, and we're going to get it done right. So I invite, as I have already, we had a meeting with 7 or 8 of us earlier, I think it was a little late last week, and with a designer, an architect. And all we did was chatted about it. We didn't solve any problems there. We're not going to solve it for a while because it's going to take a long time. It's going to take 18 months to 2 years before we even are going to be ready for an excavator to go there. But we are going to be listening. And I handed out cards at one of the public hearings, and I forgot mine today, but if you want to get a hold of me, just call Luke. He's got my number. And because we really, really want to get it right. Because there is a big, big, horrendous need out there. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. John?
John Wood, 466 Troon Close in Qualicum Beach. I don't know if any of you today have been unbusy enough that you had a chance to look at the Town of Qualicum Beach website. There's a new item posted there under, what's it called? Under projects, which clearly shows that the development on Railway Avenue will not, I repeat, will not encompass the community garden. You were right. And I don't think any of you have had a chance to see that. I had a chance just before I came down to this meeting, and it's a breath of fresh air, and it's, I think, would make, excuse me, would make a lot of people happy to know that. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments?
Lynn Brooks from Arrington, but a probable future QB resident. Well, I'm speaking as my own self individually, my ideas and opinion on the railroad property and also densification. I think it is extremely important to have more housing for more people that's affordable. That of various places that I've seen around, it seems to be a real logical place to do it. It also doesn't have to be either or. I mean, definitely the community garden, no question on that. But there are a number of people have said there weren't much in the way of trees. There are, you know, at least 100 trees of different sorts there that are good. And my thought as a kid, being a professional tree climber at that time, it would be really neat to leave as many of those trees there as possible, maybe have a building, I would say, 4 stories high, something like that, 4 or 5. There's a huge wall of trees to the south, so a high building wouldn't be obtrusive at all there. If you had several buildings, and then either the whole south row along the track, between the track and the south, leaving as many of those trees as possible, it would be shading, it would be beautiful. They're already there planted. It takes a long time for a tree to get that big. They all support wildlife. There are all kinds of native plants there. So I would suggest, I personally think it'd be a great place for development. It's near town, but it's how it's done. Knowing that Walter Hoagland's involved, I've worked with him before, he really listens to people and is able to do compromise and work with. So it seems like a great place. It seems that it would be pretty easy to work in a plan to save some of the trees. There's a whole lot of paved area and areas that could be built upon and not totally destroy it for both, you know, the beauty of the area, for the wildlife in the area, and really, if we want kids out there running around, who wants to run around pavement? You know, you've already got trees, they're there, they're high enough to climb, so thank you.
Doug.
Doug McKay-Dunn, 2617 Island Highway West. First, I want to compliment council. This has been a brisk and robust discussion, and opinions have been laid on the table in such a way that we understand where you're coming from. And to echo the words of not this previous speaker, the one before that, is that if we listen to each other, we can make sure we get this right. Now, what happened with the community gardens, Your Worship, is that during the discussion, initially, a comment by one of the councillors when asked about the community garden said, well, maybe it might go. And that was repeated in the community and caused a great deal of angst and concern. And that was the same meeting that when it was proposed that there should be 2 parcels, and the community garden and the railway station be separated, would be one way of going. Now, I understand that there's been an announcement on the website that the community garden will not be touched. I hope that's going to happen. And I don't support breaking it up. I think it is what it is, and it should be there as a community amenity. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Doug.
My name is Fox McKinley, 346 Nensville Road. I just want to make a couple comments. I see 5 people sitting in front of me. 3 obviously care less about what the community thinks, their way or the highway. 2 believe in fair process and want to approach the citizens to get what they want. And I would just like to suggest that 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, I attended the council meeting. I was at the mayor's meeting this morning, and I'm here again now. And Alex Bears could have saved a great deal of money when he produced the Gong Show by just having it here. Thank you.
Pat Jacobson, 606 Sumac. I've just got 2 short observations and 1 suggestion. The CAO strategic plan update did not mention the tree and vegetation management plan, so I still don't see where that's a priority. And the evaluative criteria outlined by the manager of engineering for the age-friendly transportation plan did not mention an environmental assessment. So I'm assuming that wasn't done. And the 1 suggestion I have, which I mentioned to the mayor this morning at the open house, is he should look, or the town should look at the viability of Timberfest in light of the global pandemic. These axe carvers are coming in from around the world, and I think, or chainsaw carvers rather, and these chainsaw carvers, I think, are the core of the success maybe and the financial implications of this $50,000. So I would take a look at that, and if that now would be the best time to get out of that if that's what's going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw you walking up, sorry.
Lois Eaton, 591 Tamarack Drive. First, I would like to thank you for bringing the Qualicum Road, Fern Road East, Dolly Mount crosswalk. I've been asking for that, as you probably remembered, Councillor Westbrook, for about 8 years. So I'm pleased that it is coming through. I ride there almost daily, and I have my dog with me, so it's a little bit tricky. And I would also like to thank you, Mayor, for recognizing the need for structurally including the environment in town actions. That was delightful to hear. I do want to say that I do think it's important for us to have a plan and have processes and follow it. There is no right way to do the wrong thing. So if what we want to do is have affordable housing, let's do it the right way. If it ends up being on this lot, and if trees need to go, let's do it the right way. When the gentleman came up and spoke and said, we're a small community and we can get it right by listening to each other, I wholeheartedly agree with that, and that was so good for me to hear. I want to mention about the cost of replacing trees. I assume if we're going to do this railway property, that the town will be ready to replace about 100 trees. Now, there is online a really robust tree value calculator. And if you go in and look at that, that actually gives you the value of a tree for a year. So you can just randomly put in whatever it is you think, and it looks at a number of different factors. So replacing a 100-year-old fir tree with a maple sapling is not a go. I mean, it's illogical to want to do that. We have to look at replacing trees with the value of the tree that we took away, and it would be a problem, I think, on the railway land because there are a lot of trees there. That needs to be something we factor in. When Pat mentioned a lack of the environmental consideration in so many things, we can't do it as outside of even the caboose add-on. It needs to be part of the plan. We need to, well, I've asked for this many times. We have a number of North Star guiding lights. One of them is our budget. One of them is the OCP. One of them is the strategic plan. And for goodness sakes, it's got to be the environment. Any motion or any bylaw or any action that we take, any information coming from staff should reference those things instead of us having our fingers crossed and hoping there's money to do what we have done. You know, $50,000 for Timberfest and $75,000 for health, which is a provincial jurisdiction. I really think we need better health plan, but I don't think we're the ones to do it. I do want there to be, okay, wrap it up. I do want there to be community events here. I don't think a chainsaw event works. And the last thing I wanted to say was about the parking meters. This is a tourist town, and it's in the happy transport plan, or what is it, age-friendly, or whatever it is. We need to really carefully consider what parking meters are going to do to tourism and to the businesses. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Judy Kemp. I live in Dashwood. I'm new to this process of government. I was a very busy mother and a school worker for many years. Art Skipsey was one of my heroes, and he used to come to work and after a weekend in the woods very often with his Cub Scouts and other activities he did. And I had this faith in local governance that led me down this pathway where I didn't pay much attention. And now I have a huge learning curve to understand how decisions are being made. The cynicism in this community right now, the upset that I'm feeling right now, just speaking to you, this is way beyond my comfort zone to be at this mic, to say something to you. I will say this and I will cease. It's like that old Simon and Garfunkel song. People are hearing some of us, Councillor Harrison, without listening. And I've heard council members use names towards people in the community today, and I've been offended by that because they're working really hard, and they are all volunteers. And there are doctors in the audience who have huge education on matters some of you do not, and I think you should be listening to them. And I should have said gallery, not audience. So as a very long-time resident of this community, I'm scared. I'm scared that the voices of citizens have been drowned out by business owners, realtors, developers, campaign contributors, and a minority of people in this community now have a louder voice than the majority of the community. And I understand in global politics that's happening, but I never expected it to happen in Qualicum Beach. And I'm suffering from what most seniors are suffering from in this community called cognitive dissonance, that we've elected a people who are making decisions that are undemocratic. You're not hearing the big voice. You're hearing the little voices of people with lots of money.
Motion to adjourn? All in favor? Thank you.